live yet. I'm not seeing that I'm live. I should be though. Come on. There we go. Okay, I am. All right. Let me get a little better light. That's the wrong. Here, let's get some better light. Oops. There we go. Terrible way to start a stream. But all right, I'm trying to see how this new Streamlabs works because I got some things to share with everybody. If you're watching, if you're on this, let's see here. Let's go this way. Send me a comment. I want to see if my chat box works, and if not, well, I'll work on this as we go because it's been a while since I've made a commitment to doing any kind of lives as my life has changed and shifted. But I want to give everybody an update first on my potential cancer diagnosis. So as I showed people, the PET scan came out really well. Didn't show any other hot areas in my body. So I've refused to do a biopsy because I don't want them shoving a needle into that tumor and breaking that protective sheath unless they can tell me why it's there. And so, long story short, I took a blood test. It's called a liquid biopsy. It can detect like 45 different types of cancer. And let me see what this is. No. And it just is another marker to kind of show me there has to be an origin of this cancer that they're saying I'm having. So I have another follow-up next month. I'm doing the ivermectin and the menbenzole and all that stuff, and I'll just have to see what happens. But I tell you what, one thing that really did happen during this time frame is when you're faced with something like that, with a genuine potential mortality in your life, a lot of things really didn't matter as much anymore to me. I started thinking, if I only had a year to live or 2 years to live, what would I do different in my life? And the one thing that I realized, and the one thing that struck me the deepest is I just don't feel like I'm bearing fruit for the kingdom of heaven. I don't think I'm living up to the full potential of why God saved me, wretched sinner that I was in the first place. And, even though I've been very active in my Christian life, it has only been since I was Orthodox that I truly began to see some level of purification and change in my life that was incredible, right? And, when God begins to transform us, that doesn't mean we have to run out and be priests, though we need priests, or that we run out and be monastics, though we need monastics. I don't know why I can't see my chat bot. Wait, let me see here. No. Lost my train of thought. I want to be able to communicate with everybody, so I may take a minute to try to figure this out and why. But let me finish what I was saying. And those of us that come from like evangelicalism or these hardcore backgrounds where people were like door knocking, like Baptists, feel like we have to be doing some kind of ministry in order to be really proving our Christianity. And so a lot of them come in and they convert and they want to, I want to be a monk. I want to be a priest. But, I was talking to my priest one day and he said something very vital and true to me. And he said, we're not striving to be priests as Orthodox Christians or monks. We're striving to be saints. And it doesn't matter what position in life you are, you're striving to be a saint, to be purified, to be illuminated, to be deified and achieve theosis, where we're transformed into the image and likeness of Christ. All right, give me a second here. Let's see why I'm not seeing my chat box. Alerts and widgets. Whoa. Let me get out of here. Yeah, that's not it. Well, let me get back over here. I don't know. I'm going to work on this. So anyways, even though, there's been no definitive decision on the cancer, I still have the tumor in my neck. I realized that I want to serve the Lord with all my heart, mind, and soul. And I want to bear the fruits of a Christian and the things that God saved me from in my life. People need to hear, because I wish I would have heard it. I wish I would have had someone come into my space during those times when I was struggling with addiction, when I was trying to learn what it was like to be a Christian, when I was out of prison and suffering from PTSD and, not knowing how to live as a Christian in the world, when I was going from evangelical church to home churches, searching for somebody that could give me, the practical ideas and methodologies for how to be healed, and they could not do it. I'd go to a pastor and talk about my addictions, and he'd say, "Oh, you need to put on Christ, brother." Okay, I'd ask him, what does that mean practically? How do I actually put Christ on? Like, can you give me something a little more than a vague theological supposition, right? And they couldn't. And so my life would become messy, and we would end up either being part of a church that imploded, it split, or we'd be ostracized because of the problems we had in my life and in my family. So one of the things that came to me that I'm going to do is I've been putting together a book for a while. Many of you know I'm a therapist. I have a master's degree in counseling, and I'm about to finish another master's degree in Orthodox theological studies from the Antiochian House of Studies, right? So I have a little bit of a educational background. And as I work in the therapeutic realm, I see what a lack there is in the mental health arena because of a lot of things which are actually spiritual disorders are classified as mental disorders. And they don't even take the spirit into effect. They used to. If you went to 12-step groups, the groups would be like focused around, if you read the 12 steps, the purpose of the 12 steps is that someone would have a spiritual experience. It was a spiritual program. AA classified addiction as a spiritual disorder, right? But all of that is gone. We're falling so deeply into the Antichrist religion of the future that, you can hardly even talk about spiritual things. So as I go out there and I do these groups and I work with these companies, it's very hard for me because they want me to use this evidence-based, curriculum that really is just trying to give people psychoeducation and cognitive therapy tools, many of them who don't even want it, right? But it's not addressing the deepest core issues. And so I see that on one side in my counseling realm, but in the church realm, I see that a lot of priests are overworked and bishops are overworked, and they don't have time to really put in the work that they really need to be putting into every parishioner, right? Like, they're not just a sacramental part of these people's lives. They're supposed to be hearing their confessions. They're supposed to be doing some spiritual healing, giving them some spiritual medicine. but they're getting ran so ragged. You have churches that have 200, 300, 400 people in one priest, that there's no way they can actually do the work. And so, while the sacramental part is central, the noetic work isn't getting done. And a lot of time these priests are sending people to psychologists. They're sending them to psychiatrists. They're sending them to people that have a radically different worldview about what is mental health, about healing, about mental suffering, because they're the professionals, right? Which I think is madness, honestly. And some of the justification I get is, well, Seraphim, that's out of my scope, for one, which it's not. Noetic healing is not out of your scope. And that there's many good Orthodox people that work in mental health. Okay, I can agree with that, right? I used to be very anti-psychology, very anti-therapy, therapist. But the more that I've trained and I've learned and I've met people, I have found some very compassionate, loving people that are out there with all of their heart, mind, and soul trying to reduce suffering in the earth. They're out there trying to figure out what to do with the problem of addiction. They're out there holding hands of people while they die in hospices. They're out there taking, the worst unstable, institutionalized schizophrenic patients, and they're being present for them and giving them space and trying to teach them tools to live a life that doesn't quite have as much suffering, right? And I've learned to grow and respect the institution in some regards when it's not been politicized, when it doesn't become anti-Christ in nature, but it's those people out there actually trying to help and do some work. And then, and the other way around, what they do is, you can reject the foundations of psychology and the people who founded it and how it started. It stemmed out of philosophy, and I'm actually going to do some videos on this, and not deny the reality that some of the research they've done on behavior, on developing habits, on personality traits are good information, right, that people can use. But because, like Metropolitan Saba said, we're moving out of this immigrant-minded phase of orthodoxy, and this influx of catechumens is really going to cause some disruption, and it already is. And that's why I'm going to go over this Substack from a catechumen that's 5 years in, and he sounds very disappointed, very, very disillusioned with orthodoxy. And I want to point out some key things and warnings if you're coming into the church. Now, I'm not doing this podcast as a priest. I'm not a priest. I was actually moving in that direction and realized that no. You really better have your stuff together if you're going to be a priest. And honestly, I didn't feel like I was fit, right? And I'm coming at this from a person that is educated in orthodoxy. I've been a catechumen and in the faith for over a decade, and have a degree in counseling and work in that field, so I can bring a little information together, and hopefully it's meaningful to people, right? And I know people are going to say, you're not even a priest, blah, blah, blah. Okay. Then listen to me as a therapist. Listen to me as a brother in Christ, as a fellow Orthodox Christian that has had his own struggles and journeys, and understands that the lay ministry in the Orthodox Church is important. It is as important as the liturgical ministry. And I hear the pearl clap. Oh, are you saying the lay people are better than the priest? I'm saying no. Because guess what? If you don't, we're not like Roman Latins. the priests can do a liturgy on their own. Liturgy means the work of the people. And if there aren't people, if there isn't lay people in that church, they can't even do a liturgy, because it's symbiosis. It comes together. The two become one. And so I see these veins. Some is like clericalism. People think that we have these spiritual kings called priests and bishops, and everything needs to be run by them. If you're going to buy a car, you better ask your priest permission. Like insanity. The other side of it treats the priest like they're their personal priest, and like really give them a hard time and command them around and demand them around. But no, those of us who have been in the faith long enough are going to have to fill in the gap, and we're going to have to help our churches, because sometimes I think, like, is this convert influx really like the enemy just flooding the zone? You know what I mean? Is that what's happening? So I'm not seeing any comments. I really wish I could figure out. I had it up before. Let me see if I do it in studio mode. Layout editor. Mini feed, legacy events. Stream. Yeah, I just don't know. All right, I'm just gonna do this episode without any comments, and I apologize. Maybe I can actually. Here's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna watch my comments on X. See if I can turn this down, and if I see some comments, if you're on X, you can communicate with me as I get this figured out, because I'm getting to my point here. But let me get. All right, there we are. We're live. All right. Now, if you give comments, I should be able to see them. But anyways, so like, one of the things I decided I was going to do, I went out and I found some property. And the purpose of that property, many of you know that I quit my job in order to go work out with homeless people, with addicts, just at the beginning of the year before I found out I might have cancer. And that is still the desire of my heart. But as I see these gaps in the church, I'm going to do a series of videos on noetic healing, on the history of psychology. I want to be of service to people, whether Orthodox or not, to talk about these things, because we have a lot of converts coming in as well that are seriously damaged and come from broken homes. We're not like the cradle Orthodox, that many of them have really good, strong heritage and families. A lot of us are coming out of craziness, satanic cults, homosexual parents, completely absent parents, broken homes, prison, you name it. Right? Things that the immigrant Orthodox Church are not really familiar with in this country, even though they may be in their own country. Right? And so the church is going to need us. But if I only have a year left, or 2 years left, or 3 years left, I want to spend part of that time putting down these videos of what God has taught me about healing, because 12 years ago, I was a homeless heroin addict. I've been to prison. I've been in the military. I've been all over the spectrum. I've fought state-sponsored child kidnappers. I was a heroin addict for 3 years. And I did all this in an evangelical context, because I encountered God. My life began to be transformed when I was in prison. But it wasn't until I was baptized into the Orthodox faith where God actually, literally began to heal me in ways that I had always wanted and I didn't, think were possible. I did do a podcast recently that tells some of my story. And to me, that's not the most important part. You know, when I work with people coming out of prison, I don't, um, share my story a lot. I don't disclose a lot because I don't think that's important to the work that I do in that context. But when it comes to being delivered from sin, being healed, the church being a hospital, why psychology has deficiencies, why orthodoxy has the answer to the human condition in a fullness like I have never seen in anything else. And there's a lot of good books out there like Larchette and Orthodox Psychotherapy and Mother Silouan and Elder or Saint Thaddeus. Is it Saint Thaddeus? Elder Thaddeus. I got his book over there. Our thoughts determine our lives. And part of what I'm trying to do is distill a bunch of that and at least get it in a simplified format. And then I'm going to do a series of videos breaking it down so that even if I'm not here anymore, people have tools for the things they would come to me for. Like, how do I overcome this sin? I'm depressed. This isn't working for me. My family life is still disrupted. And not in the sense of a spiritual father, but as a brother, as a therapist, and as somebody that has researched this stuff extensively for his own life and his own salvation. So that brings me to number 2. So today I got this Substack, and it's written by a convert. Let's get over here. And he's been a convert now for 6 years. And I want to read this because I was going to respond to it, via, right now to response. But I think because I do terrible, my last work told me to stop writing emails because even though there's not tone in emails, somehow I always seem to upset people and pass tone through my emails. And so rather than write this guy and him think that I'm attacking him or that I'm being unserious or making fun of him, I just want to do a video because some of these things are going to confront people that come into the Orthodox faith. And if you come into the faith, I would encourage you to go and read, let's see. The title's called I've Been Orthodox for Over 5 Years. How Am I Feeling Now? By Edwin Robinson. And he has a series of his journey into orthodoxy, which I may touch some of that, but I would encourage you to go read it. And then you'll kind of understand how he got to where he's at. But there's a great level of dejection in this Substack. But I want to point out why. Like some of the things that are just glaring that explain why he's in the situation and the position that he's in. See, I was in evangelicalism for 15 years. And so I've been to churches all over this country. I traveled this country as a street preacher, preaching on street corners, trying to find deliverance from my own sin, my own issues, trying to find actually where the Church of Christ was. I've been to Pentecostal churches, home churches, Mennonite churches, ex-Amish churches, charismatic churches, hyper-charismatic churches, mega churches, you name it, independent fundamental Baptists. Like I spent time in all of these places trying to figure out why there were so many competing ideas of what the church is and who Jesus Christ is. And why even when I fully committed myself to these places, I fully committed my heart, fully submitted myself to the leadership, I still could not find freedom. So let's go and read this article together, and then I'm going to break it down. And this is just me kind of getting my juices going again after years of not doing these. I've done a video here and there, but the way that the faith has really transformed my life. I didn't even feel like there was much I even wanted to say anymore. I just wanted to learn to be a Christian. And I still feel that way. But with my scare and even the thought of my window of time closing, that if I'm gonna perish, which I won't perish because I'm a Christian, but I mean if I do have cancer and this thing ends up going the wrong way, I want to leave something for you, so that my story is just not in silence. But all right, let's take a look at this guy, and he's kind of he's getting a lot of likes and comments, but let's see what he has to say. All right. So he says, it's been over 6 years since I jumped into Orthodox Christianity. In spring of 2020, Orthodoxy caught my interest. My spiritual sensitivities heightened in the midst of COVID mania and the evangelical congregation I attended at the time being shut down. I read lots of books, studied, prayed, and started attending a local Orthodox parish. I was baptized in January 2021. I've continued there to this day. I've written previously about how and why I became Orthodox. I haven't written so clearly about where I am now, what's changed, how have my thoughts about things evolved now that the novelty has long since worn off. Today I'll attempt to answer that. And again, I'd encourage you to go read the story. So basically, in my opinion, he was struggling as I was with his experience in evangelicalism and Protestant Christianity. And he goes through it in numerous ways. Like there's so many different ways that you could approach why when you're there, you're going, what is this? This is not Christianity. I know this. I feel this. I can feel that something is wrong, right? But one key that I see through this whole thing, and he even talks about it in the beginning, is that there seems to be this intellectual Western approach to how he's approaching his faith. Now, prayer, that's good. Prayer should have been first, right? Reading lots of books, I mean, that's good. But that's an evangelical way to approach this. That's why Orthodox say, come and see. My first church, the priest would tell me, he wouldn't even answer some of my questions sometimes. He would say, just pray. Just come and pray. Just come and pray. You don't need to worry yourself with that. Learn to be present. Learn to pray, right? It wasn't here, read, study, do this, do that with your mind, mentally approach this thing that we call Christianity. Why? Because orthodoxy is not by information, our relationship with God. It's through revelation. It's when we experience and we're unified and we're illuminated by Him that things actually begin to change, right? But from the Western perspective, it's apologetics, and let me tell you why these other religions are wrong, and verse by verse Bible study to create this dynamic of scriptural cluster bombs that will prove your point in everything that you do. So here's one of the things that's happened to him. He says, my engagement has changed. Back in 2020 and the early years in general, I consumed a vast amount of Orthodox content and media. I was eager to learn the theology, history, patristics, you name it. This is a pretty common experience for the inquirer convert, especially in the current era. There is a heavy emphasis on the more rigorously analytical and theological aspects of orthodoxy. I have no idea what he's talking about. I don't see that in orthodoxy. I do not see, even though there is a lot of content that when you're in a church, I would like to hear more about what is catechesis actually consisted of. Like his relationship with his priest or with the person that was catechizing him, or his spiritual, his godfather, how was that relationship? What was going on in that respect? Because a heavy emphasis on analytical and theological aspects is a Western approach, and we reject that. So he takes this consumer ideology from evangelicalism. We're religious consumers. You ask evangelicals, why do you go to this church? And they'll say, oh, I like the worship. Oh, they have great childcare. Oh, the preacher has really good it's all about their consumption, right? The problem was that eventually I hit the point of diminishing returns, which you will. If you approach orthodoxy as a consumer, you're going to get diminishing returns because God's going to block that door, right? It's not about your consumerism. It's about experiencing Christ, about the fountain of immortality, about being illuminated, about being purified, right? I don't hear anything about in these first years, I was really attacking my sin and saw my passions and what they were doing to my life and working with my priest to have those things removed to prepare myself for baptism. I approached this intellectually and then I got baptized and now I don't have the same benefit that I once had. He said, I understood what I believed as an Orthodox Christian and why I believed it, so I didn't have much interest in going further into theological specifics. That doesn't even make sense. I had no desire to debate Roman Catholics, with whom I vanishing few connections or conflicts in the overwhelmingly evangelical world in which I lived. No one's saying that debating them is actually an Orthodox activity that we should be trying to seek out. And evangelical friends and family acquaintances didn't care about my pivot towards orthodoxy, let alone particularly challenge me on much of anything. Not wanting to be an annoying convert who starts arguments with people, I'd learned how to defend what I believed. And on here, I'll occasionally write an article touching on that sort of thing, but didn't really need to go much past that. People I know in real life, especially outside my parish, don't really read my writing on here. And again, he prepared himself apologetically, but he was expecting some kind of conflict or was preparing himself to defend the faith. All of that is evangelical and Western thinking, right? It's like you're upset that your head knowledge didn't make you better. You're criticizing orthodoxy for something it doesn't promise. It doesn't promise, if you read all these books and you can argue your faith well, that there's going to be some kind of spiritual return for that. So then what was the result of that? Of him just, getting burned out on reading? He said, at any rate, I rarely buy Orthodox books now. I don't listen to a lot of Orthodox content on YouTube or podcasts anymore. And what I do consume tends to be more related towards pastoral topics or the daily grind of spiritual life than stuff related to complex theology or apologetics. This is probably good. This is a combination of several factors: laziness on my part, exhaustion with the various Orthodox personalities on new media platforms, many whom I now simply find annoying at this point, and the realization that lots of head knowledge wasn't and couldn't make me a better person. And that's good, because it can't. As a matter of fact, sometimes we can pursue head knowledge. The wisdom of men is foolishness to God, is what the Bible says. Even liturgies, the focus of our services are prayer. The focus of our services are prayer, not like evangelical and Protestants who have a man stand up there for an hour and give a lecture because they're trying to pull all this information, right? It's about encountering God in prayer, loving our brother, forgiving, praying for the world around us, getting a mind frame outside of ourselves. In another sense, though, he says, I think I got burned out on the sort of culture that emerged in the online convert sphere of orthodoxy, or what could be considered orthobro culture. The endless videos of dense theological topics and apologetics seems reflective of a tendency Western rationalism to turn orthodoxy into tidy intellectual systems. With an essentially systematized theology constructed out of patristic texts and other sources in a manner that really just fits orthodoxy into the same kind of overly tidy container as you'd find Roman Catholicism, Calvinism, or Lutheranism, to give some examples. As it turns out, highly individualistic Western male nerds have something of a tendency to take orthodoxy and reframe it in a way that suits their particular intellectual and cultural proclivities. Now, sometimes left-leaning progressive Orthodox people will use this as some sort of retort to defend their own antics. You're just opposed to LGBTQR blah, blah, blah agenda because you're wrapped a Orthodox veneer over your white right-wing reactionary box. Unlike I, who believe in the authentic and totally inclusive Orthodoxy, that was a big caveat, which is vastly sillier. Regardless, there's merit to the idea that heavy intellectualized converts often miss the whole point of orthodoxy and reframe it in a way that it becomes a weapon in their toolbox, so to speak, more than a way of life. I'm going to get to that. However, the other end of ortho-bro culture is represented by those guys who go extremely hardcore into the practices rather or in addition to theology. For this type, fasting, endless prayer services, and consuming vast amounts of relevant literature comes rather naturally. For me, however, it does not, and attempting to try this route quickly led to burnout and disappointment. It is also worth noting that the lay person super ascetic bro is almost always a single guy and thus unencumbered by the unending practical challenges of family life, especially family life with multiple babies or toddlers, which is my situation. He might grumble about not being able to find a wife, but really, if he were actually to marry and have kids, this would dramatically sabotage his ability to pursue the Orthodox lifestyle. Now, for one, I don't even know, and I've never seen this. Can somebody please define orthobro for me, right? It's almost like the term boomer. Like whenever somebody doesn't like something somebody is doing in the social media space, they call them an orthobro if they have any kind of convictions. I don't even know necessarily what an orthobro is, right? I don't know what endless videos of dense theological topics and apologetics that this guy's getting from these orthobros, because there's a lot of good Orthodox content out there, right? You have Athonite audio. You can go listen to books, Athonite books, Elder Ephraim. You have, shows like Orthodox Ethos that are actually very more like a catechesis, and that he answers questions. You have Father Jacoby, and the brotherhood that meets for men trying to be better Christians. With the Antiochians, you have Father Josiah Trenum, you have Father Turbo, you have, there's all these good non-apologetic resources on the internet that you can be listening to. So I think there's a handful of people that are generally classified as orthobro, like Jay Dyer, or who, maybe the new Luigi debater guy, or, but there's not that many of them. And I do agree, though. I do agree and understand what he's saying about, even today, my ex is just flooded with all of these Protestants that want to debate Jay Dyer, and they're upset that he quit, and these other Protestants that are challenging and saying, Ortho bros, come on here and defend yourselves. And then we have the Mormon thing going on out there, where Mormons are really upset about their classification, which started the yearly debate on whether or not Mormons are Christians. And some of that stuff is toxic. You've seen me talk about it. You've seen me reject it and be attacked. I am not a Nick Fuentes fan. There was a time when I was really in shock about the murder of Charlie Kirk that I I don't know, I got some kind of lunacy and wanted to get in touch with Nick Fuentes because I felt like they were going to come after him next. And then I began to watch his show and I realized that his show was terrible beyond terrible. And I didn't want anything to do with that, which led me to get attacked. So yes, he's not an ortho bro, but it's that kind of spirit, that spirit where everything is gay and retarded, that spirit that doesn't come from humility or compassion or a desire to want to see people come into the faith. I understand that a lot of that's labeled being ortho bro. I don't think we should be debating like we are. There's no point in it. Actually, if you think about it, the debate culture is actually counter-orthodox. Not that we don't explain to people what we believe or answer questions about our faith, but you're trying to argue unilluminated people into the church, and it's not possible. The only way they're going to become orthodox and come into the faith is if a process of illumination begins, which means they need to get themselves around the grace of God and the energies of God through the mysteries of the church, or through your love and compassion and the time that you spend with them and the conversations that you have. But these debates aren't going to accomplish much. And some of the stuff I see going on where people are like acting as if these are the spokespeople for Christianity, like Andrew Wilson or whatever his name is, it's garbage. It's garbage. It's hateful. It's mean. It's like a psyop in a sense, in that it's just trying to breed this ortho bro culture that doesn't even really exist. Because most people in the church are embracing, loving, kind, tolerant of each other's weaknesses, wanting to, they're not sitting there arguing with Protestants. Anyways, so him talking about the individualist Western male nerd, reframing it in a way that suits particular intellect, maybe that's the ortho bro culture. But I find it interesting that he says, regardless, there is merit to the idea that heavy intellectualized converts often miss the whole point of orthodoxy and reframe it in a way that becomes your intellectualized journey into the faith. And then he talks about the other side, the people that go hardcore into practices. I've seen that. I met a guy that he was barely a convert, and he was talking about how when he fasts for Pascha, he was going to try to fast the whole 40 days on just water, and he was going to celebrate. Like, he was so legalistically minded in how he was going to approach orthodoxy. I was like, you're going to burn yourself out, man. Like, just show up. Just make a commitment to show up for Vespers, then make a commitment to show up for liturgy. Like, start under the guidance of your priest in, fasting, the fasts of the church, but there is no rush here, right? We're not just going to put on this suit of orthodoxy and be Saint Mary of Egypt levitating out in the desert. That's not going to happen. But it's okay for people that do that. There are some people that may be further along the way or have a different dispensation of grace that, they are being called to monasticism, or they are being called to a priest, and they can do these long services. What I found when I went to Mount Athos, I walked out of the services a lot. I was in and out. And that was because the people that I know that helped build my faith basically said, you take as much as you can. Like, each time you push yourself in your practice, in your fasting, in your commitment to the church, in your service to other people, until it hurts a little bit, And then it's okay to step back some, right? You just give a little more, but you develop a spirit of consistency in what you can handle, and you should be doing it under the guidance of a priest or a spiritual father, which I have not yet heard in this article, right? Approached intellectually, he's a super nerd, he started building his toolbox, and then he saw guys that were out there doing it in prayer, and there's this level of envy, it seems like to me, that he couldn't go and do a 6-hour prayer. That's okay, you don't have to. Pray for 2 hours. Spiritual improvement, whatever, right? Make sure you're talking to your priest or your spiritual father or your godfather about these things, or someone close to you in your church that you know is a faithful brother, that you can see it in their walk. You can see it in the way they radiate Christ, and share those things with them about your struggles. So the other part of this that I disagree with, and I don't even know if I'm going to be able to go through this whole paper, but I may try, is he's talking, he's kind of like mocking them, the super ascetic bro. Like, maybe he's just a serious Christian, man. That's where I picked up the envy part. Like, you have to mock that. It's not almost always a single guy. I have 6 children. I've gone to multiple monasteries. I love to participate in the services as much as I'm able. I understand, like you said, it can be difficult. And you go to St. Anthony's in Arizona and it's all in Greek. And sometimes if it's not a liturgy, you don't even know what they're doing or where they're at. And it's a labor, it's a work. And sometimes in regular liturgy, I want to walk out. That's why I began to serve in the church in a different way, so that it would challenge me. You got to reframe your idea that suffering is not bad and your intellect is not going to get you there. But consistency, getting up, continue to do it. So it's not always a single guy. I mean, and I went, when I went to Athos with Father Peter, he's married, he has kids. I don't want to be puffing him up, you know what I mean? But I watched him really struggle in many ascetic ways, and he's married. He goes and takes care of his family, and he goes and he celebrates liturgy and prayers with the priest. It depends about how much work you're really willing to put in towards your transformation and your salvation. Not that those things are saving you, but it's like you're going into a gym and you want to bench 300 pounds and you get frustrated when you can't do 145, so you give up and you're looking at these big muscle guys, and no, you have to train. This is a lifelong thing that you're engaged in. And being married can be just as ascetic. There's a lot of self-sacrifice that goes into being married. Actually, it can also be harder in some respects, because as you develop that prayer life that is sacrificial, while you give yourself to your wife and your children in a way that's painful, but that's calling God's grace into your life, it's the same thing as monasticism. It's about living in the remembrance of death, living in a spirit of prayer always, being humble and obedient to people around you, forgiving them, and just being a Christian in the sphere of where you're at. So as engagement has changed, I would say get engaged. Change it back. Show up more. Pray more. But first and foremost, if you don't have someone in your life that's a priest, that's your priest, that can come alongside you and have these conversations with you and pray with you and show up with you and pray beside you in church and come to your house and spend time reading spiritual books and growing together, You need to find those. You need to find that. You can't do this by yourself. That's not Christianity. Okay, he says his interests have shifted. My interest in orthodoxy was motivated by all sorts of things, but it's hard to deny that one of them was the fact that it gave me the framework to potentially treat my faith like one of my weird OCD male nerd hobbies. I don't even understand that, but I figured that being able to do that would sustain my faith in a way that I was never able to do in the vague, subjective world of evangelical practice. In a way, it did at certain times. But here's the thing. My interest in my OCD nerd hobbies ebbs and flows. And once I put together my ultimate prayer corner and shelf of ortho books, I found myself losing a bit of motivation since I didn't have quantifiable goals to work toward. Just much more difficult, unfun spiritual ones, where I wasn't seeing much progress, just continual repetitive discouragement. Dealing with constant disappointment and failure is just sort of the nature of this whole thing. So learning to manage the feeling around that is, practically speaking, a critical step for the modern American convert. But anyway, as a result, things started to get boring. I didn't have more books that I needed or wanted to read, and instead of edifying me, Orthodox content just made me feel more upset. I've been through the whole yearly cycle of services over and over again, so there wasn't much new to experience aside from something like going on a pilgrimage to distant monasteries, which for various reasons isn't particularly viable right now. You're measuring orthodoxy by projects, by goals, by these identifiable dopamine things that you get from the newness of what you are doing. The fact that you say your goals are difficult, unfun, and spiritual all in the same sentence tells me that something is lacking there. Are you telling me in 6 years you have never been giving confession and broke down in tears and really felt the humbling power of that sacrament cleansing you and grieving over your failures? Are you saying that you've never been in a prayer service where you lost all track of time and it felt like you were in another place as you were praying and experiencing Christ? Have you never approached the chalice trembling like and don't get me wrong, even if you haven't had these experiences, it doesn't mean that you're not orthodox. It means that you're in this wilderness, this drought for a reason. And maybe it's because your whole spiritual experience in the past had been for this, to be entertained, to have fun, to be intellectually stimulated, to learn new things. Our faith is not a new thing. It is the faith once delivered to the saints, right? So it's ancient. And some of the songs and hymns that we sing, a lot of them are the same ones they sing in every generation. You're saying that you weren't seeing much progress, just continual discouragement, but you don't explain what you mean by that. Why were you discouraged? Why don't you think you're seeing progress? What are you judging to determine whether or not you're making progress? What is the disappointment and failure that keeps encompassing your life? But I will agree with him on this, and I learned this when I began to serve in the altar, that often I would be serving in a place or doing something and nobody would give me instructions and I would make a terrible mistake, like cross in front of the altar when I wasn't supposed to, or many other things where people would just gasp and I would feel humiliated because I thought nobody's telling me what to do. But then I keep making these mistakes and I realized part of my journey was this constant state of feeling and being humiliated because I was such a proud man. Because if I wasn't proud, I wouldn't have been humiliated. I would have just said sorry and moved on with my day. But God was beginning to heal. He was beginning to rip those scabs off, those areas of my life that an intellectual approach to Christianity never could do, right? So you got bored. So what? Oh, well, it says someone reposted the stream, so I may be able to hear your comments. I just got something that popped up here. So if you do have a comment or you want to yell at me or you want to tell me that I'm wrong, I am going to go through this whole Substack. Then I got to get ready because I'm going to the ocean. Maybe I'll do a live from the ocean. I got a wedding to go to. And yeah, then I'm going to come back and possibly buy this property. And I'll explain to you with that property, man. We're going to open up a place of healing. We're going to open up a place where people can come and be in the wilderness. And guess what? Be bored. You want to talk about boredom? Saint Mary of Egypt wandered around in the desert for so long her clothes rotted off her body. Rotted off her body. Saint Anthony the Great laid in a grave, or it looks like a grave, but a hole in the ground for 3 years and didn't move. There is no such thing as boredom. I hate that word. I don't let my kids use it, and I'll tell you why. Boredom, if you ask somebody, explain to me what boredom feels like to you. Give me the physiology of boredom. And they'll tell you, I'm restless, can't sit still, maybe their mind is racing. Do that with yourself right now. Like, just ask yourself, when I say I'm bored, what does it mean? And what it means is a general lack of serenity. It's discontentedness. Sometimes it's depression. So it's not that you were bored, it's that you were not getting something that you were expecting to receive, and sitting in that condition was making you incredibly uncomfortable. And that's part of the work. What happens is you stay, In some recovery groups, they say, keep coming back till the miracle happens. And that's what I'm saying. You keep coming back till the miracle happens. As for not having any more books that you needed or wanted to read, I don't even know what that means. I have so many Orthodox books, I wish I could read 3 at once. Why? Because when I read them and I read it in a prayerful state, and God begins to illuminate my dead, decrepit, old man, new man, my being, I get excited. I feel, you ever have those moments where, and maybe it's happened with you, where it's just like an aha moment. You read something in scripture that you've read a million times. You are reading a Holy Father, and something that never made sense to you all of a sudden does. And you just feel like this feeling of, whoa, that's incredible. That happens. That happens all the time. Why? Because eternity is like, the Holy Fathers taught that the essence of God is unknowable. We can interact with his energies. But what I've read in some of them, in like Saint Gregory of Nyssa, talking about how we're going to be exploring God, whose essence we can't comprehend, for eternity, glory to glory to glory to glory. So as we get those aha moments and our lives change, just like they're changing every time we take communion, just like they're changing every time we're interacting with the energies of God through the mysteries of the church, and we're being transformed and we're being deified. That's never going to stop. We're going to know him more and more and more, and it's going to blow our mind more and more and more, and we're going to go deeper into the beauty and ecstasy of God more and more forever. Forever. But sometimes we go through dry periods because we have to be taught to get up. We have to be taught that we're not doing this based on emotion or feeling or because, we're trying to prove a point. We're doing this because it is the truth, and we are walking on this path because we know it is the path and he is the way. And that no matter what dark valley I'm walking through at this moment in time, it's going to pass. And there's going to be greater things. And that will happen. No matter what sin I'm struggling with today, it's going to be healed at some point in time. I read a story about this Holy Father, and some of these stories are crazy. I get this. But he was so sick of his lust, he buried himself up above his waist and lived in a hole buried. And still didn't overcome his lust. It wasn't until later, through his practice, through his athletics, spiritual athletics, did he overcome those things, and he became a saint. But he was very serious about defeating that, and it's about getting up. So you've been through the whole cycle of services for 6 years. So what? That's nothing. What is 6 years in light of eternity? What is 6 years in light of 1 billion years? It's not even a second. It's nothing. How long do people train to be Olympic athletes? Their whole life. And Paul the Apostle talks about that. He talks about how we should struggle like an athlete, like a boxer who gets a worldly reward. They get a little crown on their head, but we're getting greater things. Like we are struggling in the arena to become deified, to be rewarded for our works, whatever we've done in our body, whether good or evil, as we stand before the judgment seat of Christ. 6 years is nothing. I'm sure it can be discouraging. If I told you my story, it's very similar. My first 6 years was very hard. I had not really good catechesis, but it was the catechesis that I needed, because everything God allows and does in this state, he's doing for my salvation. All right. Next. I don't care about Russia, he says. An interest in Russia never had much to do with my interest in orthodoxy. I don't care that much about geopolitics, even less so now that back in 2020, I've never been a Putin cheerleader or cared all that much about what he or Russia in general is up to. I neither believe Putin is Hitler 2.0, nor that Russia is going to save the world, both extremes of which represent common opinions on the internet these days. You seem to spend a lot of time on the internet. Maybe that's part of the problem. The fact that I ended up going to a Russian parish was mostly incidental. Upon researching the churches in my area, it was the most appealing for a variety of reasons, but none of those included because it uses some Slavonic as a criteria. Over time, I've become less rather than more interested in Russian stuff and generally find gratuitous Slavonic services to be tiresome, despite being less than 5 minutes total in our liturgies, especially considering that the percentage of our congregation as native English speakers has increased over time, so that at this point, I'd guess 60 to 75% of my congregation are Americans rather than first or second generation immigrants from Eastern Europe or whatever. I can feel a twinge of larpiness at the way some converts go gung-ho into enthusiasm for all things Russian. Why are you even paying attention to them? Why does their journey even matter to you? Let him go gung ho into Russia. I don't even understand why that's even a focus in your mind about how other people are going to pursue Christ in the Orthodox Church, but I digress. Though it's worth pointing out that this is heavily overstated, especially in the online sphere, compared to what I observe in real life. There is also far less Russian Puda cheerleading compared to the online caricature. It does exist, but only in a very small measure, and just one of various disparate social political threads among members of the parish. Part of this disinterest in Russian tinges my involvement in going to a ROCOR parish. Sure, I love St. Seraphim of Sarov, the royal martyrs, like any well-adjusted Orthodox person, but the gratuitous Russo-Slavonic Greek jargon involved day-to-day of Orthodox life feels like a case of using obtuse word like epitemia, zapvika, blah, 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 when normal one would suffice because it sounds cool. This tradition also tends to put a lot of emphasis on the edgiest, reactionary, most hardcore sorts of figure like St. John of Kronstadt, endless labyrinth restrictions around subjects like married sexuality, and a general sense of we are more orthodox than everyone else because of how hard we are about everything. There is very little practical or spiritual accommodation towards people like myself who are parents of multiple babies or toddlers, and as a result, the whole thing is utterly unappealing to my wife and family on a purely logistical level. Personally, over time, I've gotten far more in touch with my own sense of heritage, Scottish, Irish, Anglo ancestry, my roots in Texas and Appalachia, and thinking about my own socio-cultural background. I'm more interested in being rooted into who I actually am than trying to be more Russian, and feel myself often at odds with the parts of Orthodoxy that feel like Russian culture more than universal aspects of the church, which can end up being a lot. In an ideal world, I could go to an Orthodox parish that served the Sarum Rite liturgy or something and felt in continuity with how my pre-schism ancestors would have worshipped, but I realize it's probably not going to happen anytime soon. So, like with your other sections, there are some level of truth in this. I've said this myself. I wouldn't be opposed to an American patriarch for America, or, that maybe if you're going to be in America, the liturgy and services should be in English, right? We need to move out of this immigrant church mentality where people are adopting cultures, right? But if you're going to go to a Russian church, don't complain about it. It's like there's this negative and dark tinge, a very cynical tinge to everything this man is saying. And I know this happens with a lot of converts. A lot of converts came into the church because of the kuf. And they liked the things they saw about people who were attached to the Russian church. But I promise you, there are problems in Orthodoxy, and every church has their cultural quirks. But here's something that somebody told me, and it's another like carryover, brother, from your evangelical days. The church is not there to do the work for you. Your home is supposed to be a reflection of the church. It's supposed to be a mini church. How is your prayer life with your wife and kids in your home? How are you teaching the faith to your own? How are you building your own family up in the faith on a day-to-day basis, not bringing them to a place to consume Orthodox content for you, to do your job, And I'm not putting this man down. I understand it. My whole journey in evangelicalism was help me, help me, help me. I need help. And people saying, I don't know how to help you. But not realizing that ultimately my true Christian faith began at home, and how I treated my family, and how I worked at my job, and how I treated my neighbor, right? I love Russian parishes, and I love Slavonic. Love it. I'd love to just go to them just to go. And once you learn the liturgy well, you can go anywhere and basically know where you're at and participate in the service and pray. But again, I feel like there's this, I'm going through the motions. I'm not getting what I want out of it. They're Russian people. They're going to have some cultural biases, just like the Greeks do, just like the Antiochians do. When my wife came into the church, this Lebanese nurse that went through the Lebanon Civil War hugged us both, this big old lady, big old loud, crazy lady, and she said, "Welcome to our faith," which she meant like as an Arab. And that's there. And they do have that in their culture, that they've continued the faith of the apostles, right? Father Seraphim Rose went so LARPy, according to how you would call it, that he learned Russian. And that's okay. If someone wants to go to a Greek church and be thoroughly Greek in all their mannerisms, and that's great. But you don't have to do that. You can spend more time at home building your family up in orthodoxy, working with your spiritual father. You could go find an OCA church. You could go find a different and if that's not possible, then you build your family up at home and you utilize the church for the sacraments, and hopefully you find a spiritual father even if it's not in that church. And what blows my mind though is like when he says things like there's no practical application. Well, for one, the church as the temple, as the services aren't there for practical application for how you can take care of your family. It's there to help prepare your spiritual condition so that you can live and be a Christian. And in your own personal devotions, in your study of the scripture, in your study of the Holy Fathers, in your interaction with your other lay people and your spiritual father, that's where you get the practicality. You know, people would go to St. Paisios and ask all sorts of questions. There's volumes of his books about family, about spiritual warfare that are practical instructions on questions that people had. And if you had a spiritual father, you could go ask him these spiritual questions. But when you bring your family into the church, into a liturgy, the role of that service is communion with Christ and teaching your kids sacred things and how to participate in the services of the church in a meaningful way. It's not to give you practical advice on marriage and family. So again, that's your evangelical carryover. Often churches have groups, men's groups, women's groups. If not, maybe you could form a group and say, hey, I want to form a group for families where we can bring our kids and families together and we can study Orthodox things, and it can be blessed by the priests, and we can learn how to homeschool our kids together, or we could learn and give support to each other in our struggles as families. Fill that need, right? Fill that need. Don't wait for somebody else to do it. As for your own heritage, there is Western Rite Orthodoxy. If you want Scot, Irish, Anglo, Western Rite liturgy, it's out there. You know, the OCA is not any culture. It's America. It's American. And I think a lot of the OCA churches have a little bit of all the faiths put together, but I would say if it's bothering you that bad, find another church. All right, here's another issue he has. Many drop out. It's been surprising, or maybe not really surprising, just how many people I've known from my parish have dropped out, stopped going to church, leaving Orthodoxy altogether, or converting to something else. Others, brimming with initial enthusiasm, just disappeared with no real explanation. That's the thing about orthodoxy, at least in my experience. It exerts a very loose grip on you. If you want to leave, walk away, drop out, you don't get much in the way of pushback. You can disappear and nobody really seems to care. It is better than a toxic controlling environment where you can't leave, where psychological manipulation and pressure keeps you in the fold. Well, yeah, it is. But regardless, something about this is a little troubling. You can get a sense that if you are not sufficiently enthusiastic, you'll slip through the cracks. This is definitely a pastoral weakness. And it's part of the immigrant church mentality that we're moving out of into evangelizing America for the true ancient apostolic and Christian faith, right? And I've experienced that loneliness. I feel you 100% in that. I still, to this day, I've been in my church for 6 years. Actually, not as much since we've split into 2 churches, but I still get people sometimes that just finally notice me and ask me, "Oh, are you new here?" I'll be like, "No, I've been here since 2020." But that's as much my fault as well, right? Like, I used to get so discouraged. That was the one thing that brought me to orthodoxy. And if you hear my testimony on that other podcast when it comes out, I was so broken. I didn't ever want to go to church again. I didn't want to talk to anybody that said they were a Christian. And when my friend invited me to this Orthodox Vesper service, everybody left me alone. And I just sat there and I prayed and I cried because my life was really broken. Nobody even asked me. And it was very beautiful at that time because that's what I needed. But then there were other times when I was really struggling and I felt like nobody cared. And so one day I was praying about it and I was really upset about it. And I was like, we could do better as Orthodox reaching out to our communities. We could do better at knowing the people in our church. And all of those things are true. But I realized hopefully through the illumination of the Holy Spirit that, wait a minute, I'm not doing anything. I'm not inviting people over to my house for dinner. I'm not getting to know people. I'm not going through the church and getting nothing's stopping me from doing that. I can make a whole list of people I want to take out to lunch and talk to and coffee hour and sit down. I can be as engaged as I want to be and people would be happy to be engaged. And I realized I was the one that would just come in with a scowling face and I'd be going through my emotional stuff and I'd leave and I wouldn't talk to anybody and then wonder why nobody really connected with me for so many years. And then I began to get active in the church, But what you're describing isn't just orthodoxy, it's Christianity. The parable of the sower. Only one bear fruit. The rest are eaten by birds, scorched, entangled by the cares of this life. People fall away. My question is when you've seen those people falling away, did you go after them? Did you call them? I feel like I can hear his heart in one sense because I've felt the loneliness, right? It's what I said earlier. We have catechumens coming into the church that are so different from a cradle Orthodox that's had a family that's been Orthodox their whole life and nobody's ever gotten in trouble and they've had this grace on their home and their family. And then you have someone coming in and they're half broke down and just left prostitution and they're a male homosexual and they're addicted to drugs. And what do? A lot of Orthodox, I literally had a priest tell me once about bringing addicts to the church. Well, we can bring them when they're safe. And I told him, I said, safe? Helping people in sin is never safe. But I get what he was saying. He was saying we don't want someone coming in trying to stab people or leaving drugs in the back. Like, we need to do these things with common sense. But what I'm seeing, the common theme in what he's saying is he's not engaged, but he's upset that people aren't engaging with him. And if you're a catechumen, get engaged, show up, introduce yourself to people. If you've been at a church for a long time and they read the list of catechumens, take a name a week and go introduce yourself to that person, right? Like we've gotten into this weird idea that the priest is supposed to do all the spiritual work. you know? And if I'm going to go introduce myself to catechumens, I better get the blessing of the priest. No, you're part of the congregation. You don't need to ask a priest if you can take catechumen out for dinner. That's absurd thinking. I mean, your priest should know what you're doing. You should be engaged with the spiritual people that's in that person's life. But we could do better. I mean, that's part of what I told you these videos are going to start to be, is my part at doing better, in taking the information, knowledge I have, and trying to help people learn what it means to noetically heal, learn how we heal from mental illness, from drug addiction, how we identify the passions that are destroying our life, and how we overcome them, like the things that we need, the things that I need, right? When I talk to my priest about this, and, you know, because I too pay too much attention to people on Twitter, and I was like, you know, I'm going to start these sober living homes. And he was like, I'm not sure what you want from me. I said, well, I just want your blessing. He's like, of course I bless. Why would you even ask me that? Right? Like, this isn't an official ministry of the church. Go out there and be a Christian. Go out there and be a Christian. If you have material you want me to look at, I'll look at it. You want to start a 12-step group? I'll promote it. I'll support it. We got to get out of the clericalism. We got to get out of it. Okay. So that is a fact, catechumens. You're going to come in and you're going to feel pretty lonely, but you know what? Get out there and do the work. This is your salvation. And you're going to be offended. People are going to offend you. You're going to see things you don't understand that might upset you. Just keep moving forward. Keep moving forward and work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. You are living in an age where you have more resources, especially in America, than any Orthodox generation in this country ever. Even 20 years ago, you could barely find an Orthodox book translated into English. Father Seraphim Rose really started, and the Russian church started getting these teachings of Holy Fathers out into our society not very long ago. I mean, he died in the 80s. And now we have people like Uncut Mountain Press and all the seminaries in Jordanville and the Greeks, and they're all printing out all these books and good resources and lives of the saints. And like, we have so much in order to equip ourselves with the knowledge and the history of our faith. But we got to get out there and do something. Okay, it's not the fast track to holiness. We're getting there. Thanks for sticking with me. I see I got a few people on here. And again, you can make a comment on X, and I should be able to see it. I should be able to see it, whatever you say it on. But I'm going to learn and get this down a little better so that I'm going to do videos, and the videos will be on the subject. Then I'm going to do lives that people can call into, that people can comment on. If you're struggling with things, if there's, if you are caught up in the mental health or psychology industry and you have some questions from an Orthodox perspective, I want to provide that service. And then, of course, we're going to have the property and provide somewhere where people can actually come out and be in silence. And so I got to learn these tools is my point. As I get a producer, anyone wants to be my producer, send me a message. I had one a long time ago, but I'm going to try to get as much information out as I can and be present. And hopefully I don't get sick. Hopefully the cancer heals if it's cancer. The tumor is shrinking, but we'll see what happens. Okay, it's not the fast track to holiness, he says. In 6 years in Orthodoxy, I haven't really gotten better. Okay, what's your gauge? What's your gauge? What's your thermometer of what better is and why you don't think you've gotten there? Because I can say this much, the fact you're baptized means you're better. than you were when you were an evangelical, but let's read the rest. At all. I think I've become worse in almost every respect. If anything, it's just highlighted how much worse I am than my prior already negative opinion of myself in most regards, and seems to have been contributed directly to my general psychological state, which could often be generously described as depressed. That's why I'm doing the shows that I'm going to start doing, because I want to talk to you guys about stuff like this. I often wonder, was this worth it? What, your salvation? Would I be better off at Judgment Day being a naive evangelical than a lousy Orthodox failing to stop at even the most basic of sinful behaviors? Maybe it's a bit hard to say. I often feel like the whole thing has just given me more rope which to hang myself. What can be additionally frustrating on this point is that when I raise such concerns... Oh, Beach Girly Jade said Happy Pride Month. Oh, come on, Beach Girly. Pride comes before destruction. I think we should rename this month to Happy Nuclear Family Month, or Happy Patriarchy Month, or Happy Humility Month. Anyways. Okay, so I can see your comments if you want to comment. So he said depressed. Where does it say depressed? Okay, depressed. I often wonder, was this worth it? I often feel the whole thing is just giving me rope. What can be additionally frustrating at this point is that when I raise such concerns with my clergy, the answer I get back feel an awful lot like gaslighting. No, you are getting better, you just can't see it. This might be enough for some people, but I have a much higher than average self-awareness. That's probably your problem right there. You have a high estimation of yourself. Of course, I might overlook or miss my flaws or things that I'm doing wrong, but I'm unlikely to miss when I'm doing something right, especially when I'm only interacting with the priest at church 1 or 2 times a week. What I am experiencing is decided not what you often see in Orthodox is... That must be a typo. What I'm experiencing is decided not what you often see in Orthodox literature, where some obviously very holy guy thinks he's the worst of sinners because of some utterly inconsequential thing like pouring a slightly fuller cup of tea for herself than the other monks. I know I'm likely reading too much between the lines, but this kind of rhetorical often comes across as jumping through some hoops, as a roundabout way of feeling satisfied with yourself while circumventing more obviously pharisaical pride. As a result, it's hard for me not to roll my eyes when I hear clergy, monks, etc. make self-effacing comments, because it can come across as a sort of obligatory posturing. It's rather more convincing when they take a more low-key tack, or just politely nodding when somebody compliments them or whatever, and then moving on and not going into the whole "no, I'm so awful" thing. On this topic, I've had numerous experience of meeting someone regarded by everybody else as insanely holy, or reading their books or listening to them teach or whatever, and feeling basically nothing. Of thinking this is just a guy or lady. Yeah, I met some nice people who clearly have some spiritual qualities about them, like my godmother, but it's not such a vast night and day difference as hyper-zealous converts seem to make it out to be. Okay. I don't even know what to do with all this. Because here's one thing, I don't know if this brother sees this or not, but in every stack of comments under every subject heading, there's this level where you're sarcastic, you're judging other people. Like you said, you're rolling your eyes. Those are symptomatic of certain passions, honestly. Because in a sense, you're judging them. You're judging these priests by what they're saying isn't the way that you think people should say it. Therefore, you roll your eyes at them. You're judging yourself as to your own progress when that should be something that's being gauged by your spiritual father or your priest. You're judging the priest and you're saying, better than them, right? Like what they're saying to you, you're not putting any stock or credibility in. You're not giving them any grace that they're seeing something in you that you're not seeing in yourself. You're literally accusing them of being abusive gaslighters. Do you see that that might be the problem? The way that you view other people and your own lack of love for them is hurting you. And then asking questions like, was what worth it? You mean, do you think that you would be better off outside the church because evangelicals are not in the ancient and apostolic faith? They are a Protestant branch of the great apostasy. And what God is going to do with that, I do not know. But I do know you would not be better off out there. That they do not have the grace of God to the level that the true faith has. They're not partaking of Christ, the fountain of immortality, every week like you are. They don't have the mystery of confession, most of them. Evangelicals, pretty much not at all. I saw some evangelicals recently, they're doing communion on like Discord. They're all coming together with their little fake plastic cups, and it's crazy. Absolutely crazy. So the fact that you even ask that tells me, what do you actually believe about the Orthodox Church? Is it the one holy Catholic and apostolic church? Because from your statement, it sounds like you don't believe it is. Or that if you do believe it is, it really doesn't matter. And then you say, you have a higher than average self-awareness. What do you gauge that on? How do you know you have a higher than average self-awareness? Did you do a survey? Like you're puffing yourself up while you're attacking the clergy, but no, it's not a fast track to holiness. It absolutely is not. It is spiritual warfare. It's going to go faster than you're going to want it to, because when you reach a point like me where you are older, or you have doctors telling you you might have cancer and that your time may be short. Oh, see, I just said it. I saw a comment. My priest told me this morning to not take on too much, and for now, keep showing up and observing, participating, asking questions. He really stressed that. Golden Tongue disciple. Yes. We take it as we're able. We fast as we're able under spiritual instruction. But who's the one judging you? If you're the one judging you, you're a terrible judge. You need someone outside of you. Are you being honest with your priest? Are you actually sharing the fullness of what's happening in your family, in your life, in your home through your confession, and getting practical medicine for what to work on and how to work on it? So if you thought it was a fast track to holiness when you came in the door, I hope by now you understand it's a lifelong a battle, right? Of self-denial. And often, like you said, I mean, I was reading St. Joseph the Hesychist when he died, just in a place where he barely felt like he was Christian, because the more light that shines in your life, the more you're going to see how deceived you were, the more you see how much you got wrong, the more you go back through your life and you look at things that you used to do and you cringe, and it should bring tears and it should be cleansing. And in the last part, and I'm not attacking you, but you got to understand something here. There are people that have come in with me to church when I have had like powerful powerful encounters with God in that place, and time seemed to suspend, and I was given the gift of tears, and I thought it was the most amazing liturgy ever. And I walked out, and those people looked at me and they said, "That was boring." They said, "That was boring." And I was like, "What?" But then I realized, reading the church fathers, that it's not that there was something wrong with those people that you met. It's that you weren't spiritually prepared for them. And they are few and far between. In all my journey and all the places I've gone to, and different monasteries, and same as you, different holy people, I've only met one. And that was Mother Markella, to where I knew that something happened supernatural, where I felt like a fire burst out of my chest, and this intense feeling of love, which we don't judge our experiences by these things. Don't get me wrong. That's another ditch you can fall in, that I have to have all these experiences. Some of our experiences we need to question. Visions, dreams, we don't put a lot of stock in that. But I knew that she was a God-bearing elder, and she was clairvoyant. She told me about my life. She told me what my problem was, and I didn't even tell her anything about myself, really. I answered a handful of questions, very small, but she knew what to say to me. So one, they're few and far between. So it's not surprising that even though other people may have gotten something from these teachers that you did not, that shouldn't be a point of discouragement. Number two, and I did want to go back to one thing you said about people like St. John of Kronstadt being radical. If you read his life in Christ, that's a lot of practical application of Christian and Orthodox theology just right there. I don't know how you think he was radical. What was radical about him besides he was an ascetic and lived in a state of self-denial and was very loved by everybody that knew him. He would be followed by crowds of people and children, and miracles would happen and healing would happen around him. I don't understand how that would be considered radical. Like, that's the evidence of the grace of God flowing through the life of this man. But one thing I got from the Holy Fathers is, it's just like, when people aren't spiritually prepared to encounter God, he's like a consuming fire, like hell. I've experienced a minor thing of that when I've been out in sin, and I was addicted to drugs, and I had fallen away from my life in Christ, and somebody came up to me and they were just radiating the Holy Spirit, and they were trying to help me and talk to me about God. And I just felt that just anger and just all this nastiness inside of me, because I was not in a state where I could receive what they had to offer. So you're right, it's not a path to quick holiness, and it may take you some time to find a spiritual father or a God-bearing elder that actually has an impact on your life, but that doesn't mean that you should stop. That doesn't mean that you should stop at all. And it doesn't mean that it's not a real thing, right? It may mean that you're not ready for it. It may mean that you may encounter that situation and get some counsel and ignore that counsel to your own detriment and hurt your spiritual life, so God is protecting you from meeting. Or maybe you have met them and you just weren't spiritually prepared. Your heart wasn't tilled, right? All right. Tyranny by monastic rule, another problem this convert has. Hands down, the biggest friction I've had with orthodoxy has been what I might call monastic tyranny, wherein the writings or musings of elder so-and-so are treated as an infallible rule when he goes off on a very particular notion of how you shouldn't have fun. Do anything enjoyable, have sex with your wife unless you run through a labyrinth checklist, and so on. The subtext tends to be that if you're enjoying anything other than standing in church services, then you're very nearly sinning, if not explicitly sinning. And really, you shouldn't even be enjoying church services anyways, because that probably also means you're doing it wrong. I've never read any of that in any monastic writings, but let's see what else he has to say. This will be a bit hard to see coming when I was an inquirer, and only really becomes apparent as you spend a lot of time in orthodoxy. There can be a lot of, I hate to use this term, as abused and misused as it can be by evangelicals, legalism. That can come up across as a self-serving or at least not very self-aware musings of monastics, tying up heavy burdens to be borne by their rapt listeners that are basically easy or natural for monastics to follow in their life situation, but very difficult or impossible for those of us with families to deal with, yet often indiscriminately applied to the latter category regardless. No monastic is applying anything to your life. I'm just letting you know that right now. I will cut some slack for texts explicitly intended for monastics, such as the Ladder of Divine Ascent. I am reacting here to more modern-day teachings, musings by Orthodox figures rather than ancient ones, again, in keeping with my general affection for everything ancient Desert Church Father over more modern ones. Again, the one thing that bothers me is you're not explaining who you're talking about. Like, who are you talking about? What church fathers do you get this from, right? What tyranny? Who is imposing this on your life? Is it your priest? I don't think so. I think you're challenged by some of the writings of these monastics, and when you look at your own life and your own failings, it's discouraging for you. And if you don't have a spiritual father or priest that's active in your life, you have no way to process this, right? Because they're the only ones that should be giving you any real spiritual medicine right now. You're so new into the church. You're not going to be a monastic. You've already shared that. It just seems there's this concern with always judging ourselves by ourselves, or thinking that somebody that's not part of my life, if an ortho bro, as you call them, shares something with you and judges you, so what? Who cares? Doesn't matter. Let them live out their faith as they're going to live out their faith, and you live out your faith. Don't read monastic books if they're challenging to you, right? True Christianity is ascetic. That is a fact. The prophets were ascetic. Jesus was ascetic. The apostles were. Asceticism has been part of the church from the beginning for a reason. They're called anchorites. They bring us back to the faith. When the church drifts, they bring us back. And not everybody's called to it. Matter of fact, you're expressly forbidden from going and just trying to imitate them. If I just went and built a pillar like, Simon the Stylite and began to sit on it, I'd probably get strongly rebuked by my priest and bishop. I don't even know if God would give me grace to do what they did, because a lot of what they do is done with grace. Like, it's a calling that God has put on their life, and therefore God has given the grace to do that. But that doesn't mean we're called to do it, but we should listen to them, because they always come back to the same message, and it's noetic healing. It's not legalism. It's telling you how to be healed from the passions. At no point do they say that the lay people should, hate life. Nicholas Cavasalis or Cabal, I don't know how to say his name. Cavasalis. Nicholas Cavasalis. I think it's Cavasalis. I don't know. He was a Byzantine administrator in the government. There's been Christians in Caesar's household. There have been monks that have spent their lives as successful, wealthy businessmen and then left and went to the monastery, right? There is no one-size-fits-all formula in the church. We are all molded individually in a continuity, in a oneness, but it's always about noetic healing, overcoming the passions, and understanding that if you are enjoying something from this world, you're going to lose it. You'll have your wife for a while, then she'll die. You may have money for a time, you'll lose it. You'll have joy from a job, it'll go away. And they address those issues about how the world is transitory, right? And monastics are living in a continual remembrance of death. They are ready to die. They go out into that wilderness to pray, ready to die, as we should all live. But if you think it's harder for, or that the life of the monastic is easy to fulfill the things that they teach as compared to the lay person, I don't agree with that. I realized that, the second time I was out on Mount Athos, I realized, even from my own journeys, that the monk never really knows the fullness of the real battle that he's going to fight until he's tonsured. And I've seen it in friends of mine. It's part of the reason why I decided I'm not ready or fit to be a priest, is that as soon as they were tonsured, whether reader, deacon, priest, a whole new level of battle began in their life that nobody could have told them about or really prepared them for. It was the next stage of purification, and it's hard. And so just because they're living in a monastic community doesn't mean all of a sudden it's easy spiritual warfare. It's harder and it's worse because the enemy's going to try to drive them out of that place. So again, I don't know where you're getting that stuff, but don't read monastic stuff. Maybe ask your spiritual mother or father what stuff that you should be reading that addresses this despondency that you have, this depression that you have, this tendency to judge others that you have, and start fighting those battles. All right. Nobody cares. Boy, how much more do we got? All right. We're almost done. Where are we at? Nobody cares. Nobody cares. Nobody cares. I thought orthodoxy would lead to some dramatic transformation in my environment that those around me would be drawn to. That didn't happen. Well, it can happen. I mean, that's what St. Seraphim of Sarov said, that acquire the Holy Spirit and thousands around you will be saved. So I don't think that's orthodoxy where the problem lies. Now, some of that is certainly a failure on my part. Thank you. I'm glad that you see that. To actually live up to the ideals of it, it's not about living up to the ideals. It's about acquiring the Holy Spirit, which is pretty normal. But in 5 years, I've made absolutely no progress in getting my wife, children, or other family members to care at all or give it even the most cursory consideration. I have noticed that this is extremely common. For married couples with children, it's almost always the husband who expresses interest in orthodoxy, and the rest of the family either immediately convert with him or simply do not care. This often leads to tension and eventually family breakup or divorce. I've known only 1 or 2 cases out of many where the wife who didn't convert with her husband kids later converted. I know many more cases which ended in divorce, and this can happen. That is the personal level. What about the bigger picture? Many in the Orthodox convert sphere harbor fantasies of America the West becoming Orthodox en masse or something like that. But, well, let's address this first part. There's this pragmatism in this brother's thinking that if I do this, I should get this out of it, right? This is how it should work. Being a Christian should lead to some dramatic transformation in your environment. And if it's not, that's something you should be working out. We don't become Orthodox so that other people will come into the church. Matter of fact, because of the journey my wife and I had, and we had been to so many churches and seen so much scandal and been part of so many church splits as evangelicals, that when I became Orthodox, she was like, this is just a phase, I'm not going to your church. I've been baptized. I'm never becoming Orthodox. And even when she went to church with me, sometimes she'd get really upset with some of the things that was going on, and she didn't really feel connected to it. And, I told her she could go to any church she wanted to go to. I got a blessing from my spiritual father at the time that if she went to a church, I could at least go with her. He said, just don't pray with them and just be there and support her. And because I was a street preacher and apologist and really argumentative, and I mean, I would go out, I preached at ground zero after 9/11 from the scripture that 9/11 was a warning to America, the judgment of God. I was not afraid to go out and get in the middle of some controversy and preach some hard things and answer questions. For at least a year and a half, me and my friends would go out to the bar areas every Saturday night, and we'd go out there with Bibles and signs, and we would sit right in the middle of all the parties, and we would talk to people about Jesus from 9 o'clock at night, sometimes till 5 in the morning, and get threatened. People throw stuff. People would want to come to church. It was the most amazing and crazy time of my life, right? So I had a lot of answers. But when I became Orthodox, all of a sudden, I did not feel compelled to have to argue with anybody. Matter of fact, I would tell the people around me that disagreed with me, I would tell them, you don't have to agree with me, but I know this is the truth. And I'm going to pursue my faith. And I hope that's okay with you. I didn't know I needed your permission to do that, right? I didn't want to start arguments with people, but I was always open to have conversations, especially if they were Christians, about what was different. And as soon as I could tell it began to become uncomfortable for them, I would change the conversation. Before, I would argue, apologetics, tell them why they're wrong, which is why I don't like the Orthodox debate sphere, because it doesn't do any good. It's not the Orthodox phronema. We don't do that. But I had a peace I never had before. I used to feel like I had to tell people these things. I was compelled to be a witness for the truth, or if the watchman sees the army coming and doesn't cry out, the blood will be on your hands. You gotta, no. I let the change in my life speak for me. I let my peace speak for me. I let my financial success in my business, because I worked and I changed. I was no longer homeless. I was no longer addicted to heroin. I let those things testify to people. It took 9 years for my wife to come into the church. 9 years. One day she said, I'm coming into the church. But that is not our goal. Our goal is to be a witness of the resurrection of Christ, and by our lives witness to people those things. But it's if our focus, your focus is in this article, his focus is constantly to what everybody else is doing or what everybody else should be doing. That is a Protestant sickness. I think I've heard Father Peter here say this, that Protestant theology, it makes people sick, it damages people, and I believe that. Protestants are so outward focused, just like we saw the conversation between Ortland and, it's always about who is saved. Oh, you can't be saved, you do this. You can't be saved. The Bible doesn't give me as a Christian any criteria or permission to say I need to go out and tell people who are saved and who are not. It tells me to be saved. It tells me to work out my salvation with fear and trembling. It tells me to be the light. It tells me to let my work shine and not to worry about these other people. Just a second. Anyways, sometimes it does lead to divorce, right? Jesus said that. His gospel brings a sword. It will divide husband and wife. It will divide families. That is not an indictment against orthodoxy. That is a testament that Jesus' words are true. Your enemies will and can be of your own household. But also, we're doing the long game here. Just because for 6 years of you not even living a very strong orthodoxy according to your own opinion, he said he's worse off than he's ever been. He basically doesn't have any peace. He's depressed. What are they drawn to? Like, you're still going through this purification process. Stop worrying about other people. Just love them. Learn to love your wife. Don't argue with your wife. Learn to love your kids. Be sacrificial. Right? We don't come to orthodoxy so other people will care about what we've done. We come because it's the truth. We live in the witness of that faith. The only toward other people we're living is toward how we're going to serve and love them, not judge them, not tell them what they need to be doing or how they should be doing. As for the bigger picture, let's get into that. So he's talking about rigorism and asceticism demanded by orthodoxy, especially the hardcore variety, is simply at odds with Western European nations and the culture it produced for it to have mass appeal. Have you ever studied about Rome or Corinth before Christianity came? Pagan religions, giant orgies, like, come on, man. A nation as a whole can be saved. It's really our governmental structure that's making it harder, but anyways, let's see what else he says here. Evangelicalism is the de facto Christianity of America because its lowest common denomination faith. It has no foundation for any sort of spiritual depth, but it's easy to market, propagate. It harmonizes with the Western character. In cultures like Greece and Russia, where orthodoxy have been interwoven with the entire societal fabric for over 1,000 years, it possesses a sort of cultural inertia, but there's no such situation in the West. Russia and Greece has it rough too, guy. There's liberals there as well. There's all sorts of problems in Orthodox countries. The fact is, orthodoxy attracts a very particular sort of person with a certain set of proclivities well outside of the mainstream cultural impulse of America as a whole. These are all really broad sweeping statements where he doesn't put any kind of backing besides it being a broad sweeping statement about why this is true. This is his perception. But the ortho-bro impulse, whether manifested in the form of rowdy reactionary young men or tightly disciplined families, seems to reflect impulses that once upon a time manifested in puritanical or Calvinistic manifestations, but are now filtered through an orthodox lens. As a result, you have parishes like mine seemingly exploding with growth, largely sparked by guys watching videos by social media personalities. But here's the thing. Outside of my parish, nobody I know is familiar with orthodoxy or cares at all. That's a big sweeping statement. How do you know that? And why hasn't your life triggered some inquiry into that? What is it about your life that does not radiate the Spirit in a manner that people would ask? Are you just not involved in people's lives? Do you invite people to church? Like, I mean, if you don't know one single person, that's an indictment of yourself. What are you doing about it? We're called as Christians as a whole to preach the gospel. Now, I know I said previously I didn't feel this urge to go out and argue. What I'm saying now is not contradict that. What I'm saying now is that we do it in a different way. But while we're out there and we're seeing people suffer and we're loving people and we're giving, money to people and we're spending time with people who are sick and we're visiting people in prison or whatever it is that God has led us to do to impact the community around us, there should be people that you're engaging with that want to know what your faith is. This fact makes me extremely skeptical of the idea that people are really mass converting to orthodoxy, despite the fact that lots of new faces are constantly showing up at the parishes around the country. Maybe a notable percentage of above average intelligence male nerds is converting, but the trend I've noticed is that a lot of these guys don't have much else going on in their lives. That's really mean, honestly. Like, maybe if you got to know them and got to know what was going on in their lives, half of these things you've been talking about wouldn't be in a reality in your life, guy. Like, come on. I can see that you're very dejected. You're very cynical, and you're projecting this negativity on everything that you're looking at. I don't have a lot of confidence that anything we're doing is going to positively move or influence the culture. That nothing you do is going to positively move or influence the culture. You're right. I don't see that with orthodoxy. I see my life being changed. I see people around me's lives being changed. I see a beauty in a growth as there's a decline of evangelicalism that's happening in our churches that is amazing. If anything, the bad rep of converts seems to be doing quite the opposite. The best case scenario at present seems to be orthodoxy existing as a sort of self-contained subculture. The other factor is that I don't see normal patterns of reproduction going on. What does that mean? What is your normal pattern of reproduction? Evangelicalism? Megachurch? Few of the single guys have found girlfriends or gotten married. There are cradle Orthodox girls around, but most of them are in middle school or teenagers, and I strongly doubt they'd have interest in nerdy convert guys, even if they were a few years older. There simply aren't enough girls around for ortho bro convert guys, and only small percent of said guys are interested in becoming monks. Interestingly, there are some single girls who've been attending or converted, but I rarely see single guys interact with them at all. The most viable pattern seems to be guys who start coming to church with their existing girlfriends or wife, which leads to my next point. We'll get to your next point. What does that have to do with anything about nobody cares? You know, orthodoxy is new to America. This is mostly a Protestant Masonic nation. Okay. Russia has been Orthodox for 1,000 years. Greece, from the beginning. All right. Thessaloniki is where Paul preached. They have a very long history of impacting the culture. You are at the very beginning of yours. The very beginning of yours. So these generations, like, okay, if you looked at Orthodoxy back in the 80s, you know, you see a few explosions of conversions, like when the evangelical church mass converted to the Antiochans, but it was pretty stagnant and steady. Why? Because they were plowing, they were planting seed. Now we're starting to see a harvest. But your limited and small experience, again, we're talking the long game. We're talking about what is America going to look like in 100 years if Jesus doesn't come back soon. What is America? I believe, here's what I believe. I believe American Orthodoxy is going to evangelize the world. Why? Because we did as Protestants. Because there's something unique about the American people. And once we get our footing on what American Orthodoxy looks like, we're going to be different because the monarchies don't exist anymore. Okay? And we're going to be joining hands with countries that are already thoroughly Orthodox, and we're going to be supporting them. We're going to be visiting them and praying with them and learning about their cultures and loving them. And then we're going to be going to places where there is no orthodoxy, and we're going to be building churches. There's already monasteries, great seminaries popping up all over this country. Look at the maps. And they are solid monasteries. They are solid fountains of God's grace and energy and beauty. You're thinking too narrow. You're thinking in the scope of 5 years, not 80 years. And what your part is in changing that, what your part is in growing that culture, in sharing the gospel and engaging your community, in acquiring the Holy Spirit so 1,000 may be saved around you. Yeah, there may be a generation of young ortho bros that don't get wives, and I hope that they take all that energy and they turn it into serving the Lord with all their heart, mind, and soul, and that it's up to God. It's not up to the model. You're in this pragmatism of, well, this is why I see it's not working, instead of, this is where God has us. And why does he have us here? We need more monastics. We need more young men who are willing to go into the priesthood, who are willing for self-denial. And they're going to have to fight that desire. They want to get, okay. Or the journey is never easy. It's a narrow path. Agonize to enter the narrow gate, Jesus said. And marriage is hard, hard, hard. This antichrist religion growing across the earth, it's hard to even find people that you should marry. But that is not an indicator of the failure of orthodoxy in any way, shape, or form. How many Christian girls do you think there were in the catacombs under Diocletian? How many long-lasting good marriages happened when millions of Christians in communist Russia were dying and being executed and shot and sent to camps? How is a dating pool in the Middle East where, as Arab Christians, if they wanted to marry a Muslim girl, it was at risk of their life. They'd kill that girl if she converted. It's always hard. It's always hard. The path is narrow, but it's worth it. But this is not a reason to say that orthodoxy isn't working. So his final point, don't convert alone. Here's my spiciest take. If you are married, you should not convert to orthodoxy unless your spouse is as enthusiastic about it as you are. That is rubbish. Jesus said, if you love your wife or your children or your mother or your father more than him, you are not worthy of him. And often it is your conversion that is going to lead the way. How is your family going to get the grace of God flowing in it like a fountain, like your inner man, the fountain of living water flowing into your family, if you're just a dead corpse? Somebody has to bring the grace into the family structure. Somebody has to break the curses. Somebody has to lead the way. If you're just all sitting and waiting, you're going to perish. Out of at least 8 families I know of, including myself, only one has ended up with the wife eventually converting to Orthodoxy. 3 are married, but with the wife not attending. Okay, so what? Keep living Orthodox. And you've only been doing this for 5 years. Now you know another one, me. Took my wife 9 years. Okay. Some of my kids are older, still working that out. Pursuit of orthodoxy can often feel like a bit of a vain pursuit done to the exclusion of time or effort that could be exerted toward my family or other pressing considerations. No, they should be combined, actually. Part of you going to church and your wife not following you is your testimony to her that is going to take a place of importance. But you shouldn't be excluding your family. You should invite them every time. You should let them know how important it is to you to get that weekly or multi-weekly, that dose of grace, that service to the church. And that if your wife is going to follow you, the more she wants to spend time with you, the more she's going to engage with you with the church and your kids. But you should still go out and do things with your kids in an equal amount of time as you're able. But church should take the priority, but not to the sense where it looks like, well, you're not, you're having a crisis today, but I'm going to go to church to Vespers, see you later. It's about learning to balance the dual responsibilities. Orthodoxy is very introverted, introspective, self-absorbed manner of Christianity, which is perhaps a bit surprising given its Eastern orientation and grounding in cultures that are more group community oriented than our individualistic ones. But not surprising in the sense that much of Orthodox spiritual practice originates with solitary monastic life. That's completely false. Completely false, brother. Asceticism is Christianity is ascetic, but we have had entire cultures of Christians, Constantinople, Alexandria, Jerusalem, Antioch. We've had kings, slaves, warriors, handmaidens, business people. Nowhere has Christianity been exclusively monastic. In no patriarchy has there not been a balance of all sorts of strata of life in society. So I don't know where you come to that conclusion. This seems like a large factor in the tension involved when one member, usually the husband, converts to Orthodoxy while the others don't. It feels like the demands of Orthodox life clash with all other aspects of family life, such that it is exceedingly difficult to be faithful to both. It does clash. It is not difficult. You need to choose who you're going to serve. Orthodox practice is likely to strike an enthusiastic spouse as weird and self-indulgent. Yes, they're not going to understand it. And nerdy husband being nerdy, just a hunch, but I suspect INT personality types, same as mine, are dramatically overrepresented among American converts to Orthodoxy. Orthodoxy is basically an entire lifestyle transplant, which in some ways sounds great, but that inevitably clashes with the lifestyle of the rest of your family if they don't immediately get on board with you. They're not going to immediately get on board with you. You need to be a man. You need to be a leader. That's part of your witness, is that as you love them and you're loving to them and you're inviting them and that you're engaged in the church and you're participating in the church and it's changing you and you're acquiring the Holy Spirit, that it's either going to cause a conflict, it's either going to split your marriage or your family, it can, because Jesus brought a sword, or it's going to draw them. But you don't go to church so your family goes. You go because you are a Christian. Because you are the head of your home. And when you go and you gather up that manna, you gather up that grace, you gather up that energy of God, you bring that back into your home and you saturate your home with it. When you put icons in your home, the windows of heaven are pouring out grace into your family. When your kids see you up in the morning praying, it's planting seeds of the gospel in their mind. When they watch you going through a tremendous trying time and a miracle breaks through and they see it, it's your witness. It's going to clash. The Bible said, you're an evangelical. You guys read the Bible. Jesus said these things. It's going to clash. That's just Christianity. That's not orthodoxy. You don't think that happens to evangelicals or every single church that I've been to? There has been some family in there that was aughts with their other family because their family thought they joined a cult because they weren't Christian. That is what the gospel does. So I'm not sure why this would be a surprise to you or why you would wait for your wife's permission or your kid's permission to save your life. When I've talked about this kind of thing with clergy, the general message is along the lines of don't worry, just focus on your own spiritual life and they'll be drawn towards the church, which is generally true. In my experience, in most other cases I've seen, I have not found this to be the case at all, and it seems rather like pouring more fuel on the fire. If you stop watching TV, playing video games, listening to music, and just want to go to church half a dozen times per week, this rarely impresses your family. It just makes them think you've gone crazy. I am, of course, far less fervent than that sort of believer, but the tension is still there. I doubt you go to church half a dozen times a week. You're being excessive, being extra. But so what? When I stopped doing heroin because I'm a Christian, I don't care if the people that were doing heroin are like We don't like you anymore because you got sober. I didn't feel drawn to the people that wanted to give me drugs to destroy my life. I mean, that's okay. Did you not know that this was a spiritual war? That we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but principalities, powers, and spiritual wickedness in high places. It is spiritual war. Sometimes it is like pouring gasoline. Same as if you have a dysfunctional, addicted family and one of those family members gets sober, guess what happens? It destroys the whole structure because you've created a godless structure and now you're breaking that structure apart, right? And sometimes it even leads to divorce because the wife or husband that wasn't addicted, that lived in a codependent lifestyle, doesn't know how to be anymore, and they can't handle it. Whenever you inject such dramatic change into a family structure, this is going to happen. So what, we're just supposed to go into hell? We're just supposed to let our families and our own lives be destroyed because it gets hard? No. Don't go half a dozen times a week. Go once. Talk to your spiritual father, actually get how many times he thinks you should go. Spend the rest of the time with your family. Do your prayers in the morning. Do your prayers in the evening. Build it in your home. Nobody said you had to go to the church to do these things. You can do them right where you're at, and you can invite your family, and they can watch you do these things. In my own life, I often feel like the pursuit of my Orthodox faith and the pursuit of my family are in constant conflict with each other. They might be. To be a good Orthodox Christian, I have to devote more time to long prayers and readings and going to church, which takes time away from my family. Who told you that? Who told you that? To give my family care and attention usually requires me to do that instead of church stuff, and the tension is right there from when I wake up in the morning, when I try to find time for morning prayers in between the other family chaos, and I get pulled in conflicting directions, resulting in a sort of emotional tug-of-war where I vacillate back and forth between one or the other periodically and end up constantly feeling emotionally and spiritually drained. You probably are, right? Because you're struggling with your own inability to live out your faith from what you've expressed through this whole article, and your own judgment of yourself and what a failure you feel like you are. And so you're getting up racing, trying to do these things because you think those are the things that make you orthodox. Those are tools. Those are tools to make you, to discipline you, to build you. But you can get up every single day for prayer and not be Christian. And where's the tension coming from, right? Why is there no peace in your own heart? Like in recovery, we talk about the importance of serenity. Serenity is important. Whatever we do, we accept the things we cannot change. We want the courage to change the things that we can and the wisdom to know the difference. That tension is a creation in your own heart. Why don't you have peace? Why can't you get up with those pull and pushes and just be okay and ride it out and surf those waves and do it with a smile and do it with love? Are you crying out for that in the mornings, for God to fill you with that level of grace where it doesn't matter if you're late or people are pulling and tugging on you? You're happy. You're full of joy. You're fighting the good fight. You're winning your spiritual battles. You're blessing people along the way. You're acting in love. You're speaking kind words. If you're feeling emotionally and spiritually drained, it's because you're not being renewed by the grace of God for some reason. And I'm not saying that as a judgment. I'm saying that we're a cup that He pours in, and that's supposed to overflow out to everything around us. So it's not even us. It's an outpouring of Him and His grace. You said, in all honesty, I'm not really sure that God is more pleased with the monk on Mount Athos sitting in his room all day trying hard to experience the uncreated light than he is with the well-intentioned evangelical lady who holds many mistaken beliefs and maybe has some sinful habits, but instead of spending all day spiritually navel-gazing, faithfully serves in a crisis pregnancy center counseling sacred, anxious girls or scared and anxious girls to not get an abortion or caring for homeless people at a shelter or whatever. Well, I guess that depends on if you believe works and, are the core of what draws us closer to Christ, or if us being drawn closer to Christ is the core of why we do these other things. It seems like you're still struggling. He's still struggling with whether or not this is the church. Because if it is the one holy Catholic and apostolic church and there is no salvation outside of the church, the answer is not hard. That doesn't mean I need to judge that lady. And that doesn't mean I need to condemn her either. It means the only question I should be asking is God pleased with me? Is he pleased with me? Am I out there working with abortion? Am I out there feeding people, caring for the poor? Why? That's the one thing I keep saying about evangelicalism in the Western church is this constant outward focus on what everybody else is doing. We establish our faith as evangelicals and Protestants by what we are against. We're Protestants, so everything's about what we are against. Everything is about what is wrong. Everything is about being opposed and opposite. It's not about just being and existing with God. That's what, like when I first came and really saw these lives of these monks, and I was like, how are they serving God, running out and running away from people? Like, St. Joseph the Hesychast, when people found him and he started growing, he ran to another place. I was like, how is that serving Jesus? How is that preaching the gospel? And then he showed me. Like they were acquiring the Spirit. They were in a place of humility where they understood that they couldn't help people. They couldn't give to people what they didn't have. And they wanted to experience God. And then once they did, God flooded them with people. Flooded them. But they didn't sit around going, you're not saved, you're not saved. God, is this person going to heaven rather than this person? They sat around going, Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy upon me, a sinner, and save me. All right. Oh, wow, this thing's still on. We're almost done. Does it actually work? The big factor in my disillusionment with evangelicalism was that its practices, often vaguely defined and squishy, did not work. That's true, because they're powerless and lack the grace of God. I didn't have rapturous experience of God in silly pop concert worship, and the rhetorical performances by charismatic preacher man made no difference at all in my spiritual life and didn't bring me closer to God. I've never regretted leaving the evangelical world and harbor no sentimental attachment to its annex. But 6 years into orthodoxy, I'm not sure that it's worked either. I've never had much of a hang-up with praying to saints or the Mother of God or icons, relics, holy water, and blessed bread and all that. I found all the explanations of these things pretty reasonable and nothing at all like the caricatures presented by evangelical rhetoric. But if I'm being completely honest, I can't say that I've experienced those things making much of a difference. Holy water and lighting candles at church did not save my mother from pancreatic cancer. Okay. I mean, I'm sorry for your loss. There's no guarantee that this isn't magic. We don't do X, Y, and Z to make sure C happens. Again, this pragmatism. If I do these things, I should get this specific result, rather than I'm doing these things because this is the expression of the true faith. Praying to the Mother of God has not helped my marriage or my family. Not yet. My day doesn't seem to be noticeably better or worse based on whether I do a lot of prayers, a few prayers, or no prayers. Obviously, none of these things are like magic spells guaranteeing a particular result, and it's possible that if I wasn't doing all these things, I would be dramatically worse, but I have no way of knowing that for sure, and that's true. You probably would be dramatically worse and way more depressed. You have the grace of God on your life right now, so you're obviously going to be doing better. Maybe it's not praying to the Mother of God that is what you need to do to make your marriage better. Maybe you need to figure out what's making it not good and fix that. Not pray about it, fix it. To make matters worse, fasting, a vitally important part of Orthodox life, has led to nothing but negatives for me. I'm cranky and low energy during fasting periods and have to juggle the demands of trying to prepare fasting compliant meals for myself as just one more thing to deal with. I'm not good at fasting anyway, so this is just one more area where being Orthodox has just introduced more stress and complexity to an already challenging life situation. It wouldn't be such a big deal if my wife was Orthodox making fasting food and I didn't really have to think about it. But once again, I feel like I'm trying to swim upstream of everyone else in my family. You know, I had a similar complaint, and I was at this conference, and I was telling this guy about my family struggles and similar ones that you're talking about, and he looked at me and he said, what a wonderful struggle. And he had this big smile on his face. I wanted to smack him. And I was just like, no, it's horrible, this fight that I'm having. But then it clicked in my mind that is the journey. This uphill swim, this struggle, you're winning by doing it. It's not going to come easy. It's that journey that's going to chisel away the weak things from you and strengthen you and teach you and train you. That's why you have to get up and keep trying and stand up and don't get discouraged and keep going. And those things will change. You're basically like, it wouldn't be so bad if my wife would just cook for me. I'm like, come on, bro. Maybe cook for your wife and prepare your fasting food. I don't know. I'm not judging you. I'm not saying I'm any better. I had to do the same thing, and it did cause some arguments in that my family ate different from me, but it's just going to be that way, and it's okay. For that matter, doing Orthodox stuff does not feel like it's brought me closer to Jesus. I don't feel like I love Jesus more than I did as an evangelical. This still feels to me like such an abstract and arbitrary statement with no frame or reference to my own feelings about anything. If I'm being really frank, my experience of Christianity has always been accepting facts that I believe are true and trying to act accordingly. But that's not Christianity. Christianity isn't accepting facts that you believe are true and trying to act accordingly. That's pietism. This religion. Christianity is being illuminated, deified, purified. Not in that order. It's being transformed into the image of Christ. It's not rule following. It's not trying harder to do better. Rather than motivated by warm, fuzzy feelings toward Jesus, reading books like Wounded by Love feels perplexing and discouraging because I'm seeing the thoughts of someone who actually loves Jesus. It's easy to criticize orthodoxy from the outside as a series of ritualistic hoops to jump through that creates a feeling of accomplishment, and that's exactly what you're doing. But the fact is there are plenty of people who get the fuzzy Jesus feeling in orthodoxy. Yeah, but we don't. And we stress this. It's not about feelings. We can't even trust our feelings often or our experiences. Closely related to this, the lofty goals of orthodoxy, like achieving theosis, not only feel out of reach, they are out of your reach, apart from the grace of God, sir. They're things that, if I'm really honest, I don't really care much about or feel to be motivating factors. That's your problem. What do you mean you don't care about theosis? What do you mean you don't care about being transformed into the image of God and being merged with God, being infused with God, being one with love, with all that is good, with the creator of the universe? You basically just said, I don't get this feeling of connection with God, but I don't care either. I don't want it. I don't think about it because you're still operating in your intellect, still operating in your mental understanding of what rules you need to follow to get the results that you're trying to get. And you're trying to follow these rules that you can't follow, that are discouraging you because you're seeing other people that seem to be getting it and you're not getting it. So you're trying to follow other rules that are making it even more miserable while ignoring the most critical piece, which is unifying yourself with God. Theosis, being transformed so that you're a child of God. That's legalism, to say, I'm going to follow these rules and get something from God. That's a key issue right there. I don't care about theosis. I don't care like becoming like Christ is what you're saying. I don't care about being unified with God, but I don't understand why my life is dry and empty and why I'm depressed and can't get along with my wife. You see? All the talk about hesychasm and experiencing the divine energies seems almost laughably irrelevant to me and my circumstances because you don't understand them. Hesychasm means inner peace, serenity, that no matter what is happening around you, you have peace. You're centered in Christ. You have calm. You're describing how much you want that through this whole article. And then you're saying, it's irrelevant to me. No, it's what you need. It's what you're craving. It's what you're striving for, is that inner peace and stillness that you're disappointed that you're not experiencing. I just want to survive another day without blowing my stack because I have to work a full-time job and do multiple loads of laundry, feed the kids at least one meal all by myself, go grocery shopping, mow the lawn, bathe and put the kids to bed, and then do some more cleaning up. There's a lot of asceticism and self-sacrifice in that, sir. And the Jesus prayer definitely can be a tremendous aid with the guidance of your spiritual father as you learn to be like a monastic in all of those tasks and center your heart on Christ while you're doing all of those things so that you can be transformed. A long-term lack of correlation between doing orthodox stuff and positive outcomes has considerably dampened my enthusiasm for them. This isn't to say that I think there's no merit and it's all a waste of time, but at least in my personal experience, I've been a bit disappointed in how it's all played out, and I feel like the benefits are heavily overstated. Again, it's all based on your feeling. You're not getting what you expect from from following A to B. You're not getting C. It's not what it's about, sir. It's not what it's about. Confession is king. Almost to the end of this. I didn't realize it was so long when I started this. My wife's probably like, what are you doing? Because we got to prepare for this trip. But I felt it was important to go over this because there's a lot of you catechumens out there that are going to hit this wall. You're going to hit this wall. You're going to be zealous, and that pink cloud's going to go away, and your spiritual warfare is going to start, or somebody's going to offend you in the church, or you're going to get a priest that's mean to you, and you're going to cry about it, and you're going to want to quit and give up, and you're not allowing the phronema and the essence of the church to scrub you clean of your Protestantism that has destroyed your spiritual nous. Your nous is so confused. So confused with all that Western Protestant muck. It's like you need to become a baby again. I felt honestly like I had to and he said it earlier in this, that I had to relearn Christianity entirely. That the way my brain worked and my heart worked and my thoughts worked about Christ and my practice were utterly and completely wrong. And I had to relearn it. I'm still relearning it. All right. Oh, he's going to focus on something positive. Good. Let's focus on something positive. In an effort to focus on something positive for change, I'll point out that confession remains one of the best things about being Orthodox. I would say becoming unified with God is the best thing about Orthodox. The resurrection, not, being destroyed at the judgment's pretty good too. I'll point out the confession. Oh, you said that. It fills a gaping hole for which no solution exists in evangelicalism. It creates a venue for close-up pastoral care from clergy. Although at this point it feels like it's rather beyond the skill of the clergy to solve all my problems via counseling at confession at the bare minimum, it's evidence that they actually care for me, and that certainly is worth something. Likewise, I have much more of a sense of shared community life experience with friends and other congregants than I ever experienced in the highly subjective world of evangelicalism. Unlike previous experiences at evangelical churches, such as the one I attended in the mid-2010s, very little of my negativity stems from specifically bad experiences at my parish, where I've overwhelmingly positive and good relationships with clergy and congregants. This is a significant and probably underrated factor in all of this. Despite representing perhaps the most hardcore and traditionalist vein of orthodoxy, one where I sometimes feel myself at odds, my parish mostly has a warm and comfortable social environment rather than a harsh and controlling one. But at the same time, he's talking about that people don't care. It's weird. You're like going back and forth on these things. But here's something else I want to say. Confession is a mystery of the church. It gives you a dispensation of the grace of God that is like a bucket full, an ocean full, just pouring out on you. So you're correct. But here's another point where he is correct. Okay. And I'm going to agree with them on this point. And that's why I'm going to do this series of videos, is that the clergy don't have the time, honestly. And like I said in the beginning of this, a lot of them are leaning on secular counselors and psychologists to help people that are seriously noetically wounded. And I hope to help change some of that. I really do. Because honestly, your congregation, you should have enough priests in your church that they can be intimately involved with you. My son just got back from Georgia. I told y'all that's where I got this hat. The bishop blessed it and got blessed on some stuff out there. And he was telling me how the Metropolitan was talking, he was there with the new head of the Georgian church, and he was talking to all the Georgian people. There were so many people about Orthodoxy in America. And when he said that most churches only had one priest, everybody gasped. They were like, what? How do they only have one priest? I don't know, bishops. How do they only have one priest? The way that we're bringing priests out, I think, is going to come to a head, and it's hurting people because we need to build priests faster, honestly. But I'm not a bishop, so I can't make any decisions on that. But they don't have time to do this noetic work, and they should have time. They should be engaged in your life in a way that they can do that spiritual medicine work at your confession and know what's going on in your life. So that's just one of the things that we have to fix as the church grows, right? All those single ortho bros need to get out there and get the grace of God and become priests so we have more priests. Maybe that's why God is withholding your wife, because he wants you to sacrifice that for something much more glorious, and putting eternity above and putting the kingdom above your worldly carnal desires, in that we need priests. We really, really need priests. So you're not wrong, but you need to just keep going back to the priest. Or you need to find a brother in your church that's further along the path than you, that can sit with you and help you navigate these problems. Doesn't have to be the priest. There may be a guy, should be your godparent. If it can't be your godparent, maybe there's an older Orthodox man that's already battled these things out that you can go out to lunch with, you can go have coffee with, you can spend time with, or another priest that God connects you to, like a spiritual father that has the time. But you have to make the effort, not just moan that, oh, there's not enough priests for me. Oh, they don't have time. Okay, find somebody that does. Do the spiritual work. Theological things. In terms of what I believe on paper, I still think orthodoxy makes the most persuasive argument for being the true church. It's a terrible foundation for believing what the true church is. It shouldn't be based on argument. And essentially the correct theology and set of beliefs. But that's not what you've been saying through this whole paper. You've been criticizing a lot of the theology and beliefs and practices. Wondering if the Roman Catholics or Lutherans or, God forbid, the Calvinists have things right simply doesn't keep me up at night. But on the other hand, I find the rigorous view less convincing. I don't think everybody outside the Orthodox Church is doomed to undifferentiated darkness, and I'm less convinced of the very hardline perspectives represented in ROCOR. Although I consider myself very conservative theologically and otherwise, I found myself very put off by the internal politics and associations in ROCOR, scandals and mishandling associated with them inside of the jurisdiction. If I move to a different geographic location, I really don't know if I go to another ROCOR parish instead of OCA or something. Well, that's good. That's good. No one's telling you to be a rigorist. And it doesn't matter what ROCOR says. What do the Holy Fathers say? What do the God-bearing elders say? What do the teachings of the church say? That's where we should form our opinions. And where ROCOR aligns with that, that's good. These are things that are going to be debated, right? But again, why are we even focused on others' salvation? Are we saved? Where are we going to spend eternity? Are we going to spend it in darkness? Now I'm going to get mad because I've read this before. I'm going to try not to get mad. But this shows to me why this brother's having problems. And just even in his scorn towards St. John of Kronstadt and holy men and the examples in his life that could help in his prayers, he says nonsense like this. But he says, I can often feel like the eagerness of hardliners and converts calling for the immediate canonization of Father Seraphim Rose reflects a hasty approach and is more motivated by the urge to legitimize their perspective and bias behind a canonized American origin saint. I have no idea where you would even get that opinion. Father Seraphim Rose is how I came into the church. I am not trying to get his canonization to legitimize any of my opinions, but to honor him and the impact that he's had on my life, which is why my name is Seraphim, even though it's Seraphim of Sarov. He introduced me to that whole strain of Russian fanatics. I mean, you think St. John of Kronstadt was a fanatic. St. Seraphim of Sarov, who you said you liked, prayed on a rock for 1,000 days, man. Is that fanatical? The more that comes out around this subject, the less inclined I am to think that canonizing Father Seraphim is a good idea. Well, you're not a bishop. It's not even, I mean, I don't know. The church does have a say in the canonization of saints, but let's see why you feel that way. I've certainly gotten value from some of his writings and think he's right about various things, but there's still this air of larpy convert about him. Oh, it's going to make me throw up. Of an intellectualized, analytical, INTJ nerd trying to fit his peculiarities within the box of Russian mysticism that I don't find entirely convincing or believe was a total or even partial success. The various scandals and controversies around the monastery and Platina seem to bear this out. It has never seemed wise to me to let Eugene and Gleb, two men with past involvement in the homosexual lifestyle, set out into the North California wilderness by themselves. Forgive me for presumptuousness, but I don't think this was a great call by St. John of San Francisco. It would seem to have been far more wise to ask these men to join an existing monastic community and spend a decade or so under obedience before doing any such thing. Oh boy, brother. You're trying to advise a saint that levitated when he prayed in this life, that has a tremendous testimony of the things, and I'm talking St. John of Shanghai, that he did and his ascetic practice, and he never even laid down to sleep, and and was under incredible persecution from his own people, and you're going to give him counsel of the decisions that he should make about monastics is insane to me that you would even say that. It's just insane to me. It's like this still thing that your own self-importance and opinion is much greater than these people. But at the same time, you obviously don't get around much, because I cannot think of any other saint right now in our era, or potential saint, that has had a bigger influence not only on conversions and people coming to orthodoxy, but just in the Orthodox Church growth in general, who has not impacted people's life in almost every single country and jurisdiction on the planet. And you're like, I don't think it worked. His goal. Have you even read his biography? I'd encourage you to read his biography. It's still working. He's still impacting. Miracles are still happening out of the relics of St. John of Shanghai and San Francisco. His words prepared us for the coming Antichrist religion of the future. Like, what are you thinking? I've noticed a lot of people online space get really hung up on particular things. Like, you're pretty hung up on some particular things. One I see come up over and over again is whether orthodoxy actually teaches basically the Western notion of original sin for some reason. To be frank, I just don't care much about these nitpicky arguments that involve endless quote mining from the church fathers, and that these strike me as the mental antics of nerds who can't sit still without needing to constantly find something to nerd out about. My personal hangups and struggles are almost entirely practical issues rather than specifically theological ones. Let people figure these things out. Don't know why that bothers you so much. Again, you're too focused on other people. Over the last 6 years, there's been an explosion of rhetoric for and against orthodoxy online, as this is where most of the movement has been. I don't believe most of the movement has been online. It's been in churches being filled with catechumens. Again, out of all the evangelicals I've known in my life, I don't know any others to convert to orthodoxy or show any interest. Various Protestants have tried to make rebuttals against orthodoxy, but when I see things like the slickly produced but hollow failure of Eastern Orthodoxy, the arguments aren't convincing, especially when they try to argue things like orthodoxy downplaying the seriousness of sin, or facepalm moments like misunderstanding the altar of an Orthodox church as remaking of the Holy of Holies. Much of the rhetoric is easily recognized as incorrect when you spend a few years going to the services, hearing the prayers, and living the life of being inside the church. When you hear Protestants in damage control mode make psychological statements that are obviously contradicted by what you've heard a million times in church or prayed from your prayer book, you don't need to be a theological expert or memorize dozens of patristic quotes to know why they're wrong. Yes, once you're fully Orthodox, the arguments of people outside the church are just ridiculous. And half the time they're like, you Orthodox believe. And I'll be like, no, we don't believe this. We actually do not believe that. Or they mistake us for the Latins, and they'll be like, you do this. And I'm like, no, that's the Latins. You do this. No, that's Anglicans. You do this. No, that's the Lutherans. That's not us. Not us. All right. So he's trying to say some positive things. Oh, we're at the end. It's a long letter, brother. But I hope I've given some insight here. Hindsight's 2020. Looking back, I don't feel like my parish or priest really hindered my conversion that great. That happens a lot. I'm warning people now. You come to the church, you might not get a good catechesis. I didn't. But what I didn't do was give up. And I continue to pray and pursue and cry out and ask people and ask questions and go to places and lay hold of people and say, show me the way to Christ. Until God began to pour grace and knowledge into my life about those things that I was asking about. I started coming in July 2020 and was baptized less than 6 months later. That's another probably part of the problem. You had very little catechesis. It doesn't sound like you had anybody actually doing spiritual work in your life. It used to take 3 years as a catechumen to become baptized into the Orthodox Church. 3 years of purification. The whole catechesis process is about purification. It's about learning about the passions. It's about getting rid of those things. It's about learning of the virtues. It's about getting prepared to put on Christ. And we have lost that to some degree in some of the Orthodox churches. The catechesis is very poor. It isn't intensive. We don't have enough priests. But this is probably why you're going through this problem. I didn't have a lot of catechism, the priests seeming to think that my own self-study was basically sufficient. Please, priests, stop doing that. You're hurting people by doing that. You really are. It makes it very hard. And I'm not trying to rebuke you like I'm better than you. I'm just saying, please, 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 bishops, priests, find a way to properly catechize people and not just baptize them quickly. It's going to get so messy if you guys keep doing it this way. It's going to get so messy with this influx of converts if you are not building a strong foundation of purification in their lives. They didn't seem to worry about whether my wife was interested or not, or whether I was really prepared. There was a lot that nobody went over with me. For instance, I didn't know about the frankly over-the-top member handbook on the parish website. Nobody told me all the various sex rules, which I was left to find out on my own over the next few years. You seem to have a problem with those. That's twice you've mentioned them. I don't think it's just orthodoxy. Okay, there's been rules about this stuff in church for 2,000 years. In all the churches, besides these modern apostate churches. To be blunt, I don't think they should have baptized me when they did. I agree with you, sir. They probably shouldn't have. I should have been made to be a catechumen for at least a year, maybe 2, maybe 3, and should have received much clearer practical instruction on what day-to-day life was going to be like rather than reading about mystical theology or whatever. On the bright side, the whole catechumen program seems to have been entirely overhauled, is much more robust from what I can tell, so this may be less of an issue now, but I can't help but feel like my parish didn't exercise much discretion in dunking myself and 24 people at almost the earliest possible convenience. Maybe some of that can be chalked to everyone feel like socio-cultural world was ending in the midst of the COVID mania, but the situation still rubs me the wrong way looking back. I hate to sound so negative, but you do. But my overall mood 6 years in is one of weariness, which I can completely relate to because I was there as well. The Orthodox experience stopped being fun for me a long time ago. That's good. It was never meant to be fun. And increasingly feels like it's wearing on me and those around me. I often feel burned out and the way forward feels increasingly unclear. My personal and family life is taxing, and orthodoxy only seems to be adding to that, not ameliorating it. Should you convert? I'm definitely not telling you that you shouldn't. I'm telling you that you should. You absolutely should convert to orthodoxy. You actually should reject any other Christian, pseudo-Christian, Mormon, Muslim, Buddhist, religious belief that you are engaged in, and you should go immediately to an Orthodox church and you should begin seeking and repenting. But what I hope is that some of my experiences might help inquirers work through the issues that I didn't consider or know about 6 years ago and avoid diving into the world of orthodoxy with excessively rose-colored glasses. Having a more measured set of expectations going in would benefit everyone involved. Phew, that was long writing. There's a lot of good stuff in there, right? I mean, we have some problems coming, ortho folks. We have a lack of priests to deal with those problems. We have bad priests, and I'll be the first to admit it. You know, when I was in training for the priesthood, and I spent a lot of time with bishops and priests, I've seen the wizard. I've been behind the curtain. It's why our faith is not in those things, because it's always been that way. You look at some of the lives of the most esteemed saints like Saint Nectarios, and it was bishops, high-level people that were spiritual leaders, that were the worst to that man, and then they canonize him. Oh, you're a saint. We're going to kill you? Some of those religious leaders remind me of like what Jesus said to the Pharisees. He said, you adorn the graves of the prophets, but if you're the sons of those who killed the prophets. He basically was saying you would have did the same thing. They got mad at him for saying that. We do the same. It was church people that took St. John of Shanghai to church. It was a deacon that tried to kill St. Jacob. It was a co-monastic that blew up Platina with who knows what happens. It's competing things. The Russian church was split by communist, Sergianist, and catacomb. Like we're in a spiritual war. These things are going to come. If you come to orthodoxy, you are coming to Christianity. And if you're in a different Christian labeled expression and you know the Bible, then you know it is a spiritual war. And you know that it's a narrow path. But I can tell you this, in the 15 to 18 years that I was an evangelical, I truly never saw how terrible of a person I am until I became Orthodox and God began to rip off my scabs and put the mirror of the law and the gospel to my face. I read the Bible. I street preached. I prayed. I'd spend hours in prayer. You name it. I was just like he said, I was just as zealous. But because it's lacking grace in those other places, I was not healing. And I kept failing, and I would do good for a while and I'd crash and I would fail and I'd hurt my family. But it is the true faith. It is the true light. It is the faith of the apostles. It is what the fathers have taught. I feel for this, brother. I'm sure there's a lot of people out there in the catechesis process. You know, they're coming in the church with really messy lives and they feel alone. And I hope we learn to do better as Orthodox in actually starting to build spiritual communities and caring about what's going on with our neighbors. And, you know, you go to Russia and they're out there building hospitals and working with addicts and working with pregnant women, you know, and I talked to my priest about that and he said, well, we don't live in an Orthodox culture. And I said, but that's no excuse, right? We should be doing these things. But we are in a stage of transformation and growth. And so that's why I'm going to be stepping out and doing more of this work. And once we get this property online, the goal will be to bring people to have weekends, to have moments where people can come out into the mountains of Colorado and just disconnect and shut off their phone and have fellowship together, men and women, different times, different events, and practice silence and learn to build each other up and pray together in the wilderness. That's my heart. And then eventually to build these sober living homes that are run on an Orthodox understanding of mental health and illness, because I truly believe, I know my priest disagrees with me because he told me so. He said, Seraphim, sometimes when we were talking about our disagreements about psychology and counseling, he said, sometimes there's so much stuff in the way people can't find the door, and these other things help them find the door. And I told him, I think that can happen, but that's not what happens most of the time. Most of the time they get damaged worse. And we put way too much credence into these professions that are destroying people. Absolutely destroying people with all sorts of mechanisms, with false theologies and false ideologies about personhood and about sexuality and about treating things with drugs and you name it, right? And so this cancer diagnosis woke me up, and I think it's healing. I don't think I have cancer. I've told you all that. We'll find out here soon when these tests get back, but it did show me that time is short, and I really want to share my journey in my life with all of you. I don't know if anyone knows Edwin Robinson. He can send him this video and say, this is my response. I'm very sad in my heart, but I understand your experience. But it's because you're still polluted with Protestantism and evangelicalism, and you still need proper catechism. And you need a spiritual father that can start digging out that infection and start patching up your wounds and actually start teaching you the way so that you can be filled with the Holy Spirit, that you can experience God. And it's not a nerd out thing. It's not a I need to do something thing. It's a real and experiential reality with you and the energies of God. So thanks for listening to me babble. I didn't realize it was going to take that long to do that video, because that was I was just going to write it out, but I thought I'm going to go through this point for point, because I think there's a lot of people probably out there that are struggling in the church a lot like this guy is. And don't give up. Get up every day. Keep crying out to God. Learn the Jesus prayer. It is by participating in the mysteries of the church that you're going to be infused with the energies of God in a way that is real and transformational and is going to change your life. Whether that's through holy icons or through relics or the liturgy or through marriage or through monasticism or through confession. And you're going to have dry spells, and you're going to push through those, because we're playing the long game, and that's to the end of your life. It's not 5 years. It might be 80 years for some of you. But don't give up. And I'll let you guys know when I'm going to start the series. I'm writing it all out right now, in what areas I'm going to touch these things in. I want to have the booklet done that kind of compacts it into noetic healing and what it is and what is theosis and what are the passions, and actually this expression of the Orthodox life in a way that's healing, why it's different than psychology, how they're competing worldviews, and how we can heal, and how the Orthodox Church actually in reality heals us. And so have a good evening, and probably my next broadcast will be while I'm sitting on a beach in Florida, because that's where I'm going. I'm gonna take a break. I took off work, and I said, you know what? I'm gonna go to this wedding, and I'm gonna relax. I'm gonna hang out. I'm gonna love my family, and I'm not even gonna go to church, because I'm gonna spend time with my family, and that's okay. Edwin, you can do that. You can just take a whole week and just do nothing but love them and spend time with them. And you're still a Christian if you do that. Finding that balance. But if the video bless you, share it. If you have any challenges for me, feel free to message me, DMs, or you can go on YouTube, or you can email me at mountainorthodoxy@gmail.com and get all this stuff down where I can see the chat better. And I'm also going to be on Kick and Rumble and do some other things. And I'll be talking to you soon.